The Assembly Committee of the Whole will come back to order. I hope everybody had an opportunity to get some lunch, to step outside for a minute. It's a very nice day outside in Carson City. And we will welcome our presenters back to the table, Mr. Aguero and Mr. Hill. Just as a reminder, committee, we are on our first round of questions. We will have a second round once we get through the first round. And just a reminder that if you can keep your question to one question this time around, that'd be helpful to make sure that we get to everybody. And just so you know, at the moment I have about 10 people lit up for questions, although I think there are more than that. So, gentlemen, welcome back. And we will go next for a question to Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you so much for the presentation. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding correctly that the community benefits package is contingent upon $1 of the ticket sales. Is that correct?
Assemblywoman Gonzalez, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Not exactly. So
Okay.
There's a couple of different pieces to it. During the construction period, before they have any ticket sales, it's $500,000 a year. And then what it says in Section 23 is that after the project opens, it will be 1%, which is different than $1.
1%.
1%, or 1.5 million, whichever is more as a result. So we would expect ticket sales to be a higher number than 1.5 million, but if for whatever reason it was lower than that amount, the 1.5 million would be the required amount.
Okay, so my question is, in the event that you don't generate that revenue or that profit, how are we still implementing the community benefits package?
Sure. For the record, Jeremy Aguero, they would be required to pay the $1.5 million, I suppose, even if ticket sales were very low. Again, I think it's a pretty unlikely outcome, but in the event that it happened, the A's are still committing to $1.5 million every year for the next 30 years.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a kind of a specific question. So it's my understanding that the property, the 9+ acres, will become exempt from property taxes that are currently being paid, but it's exempt from property taxes because it will become it will fall under the Las Vegas Stadium Authority. And on page 21 of the presentation, it says on bullet 1 that the A's will transfer ownership of the land underlying the stadium to the Las Vegas Stadium Authority. I believe I previously read that the real estate investment trust that currently owns that property is selling that 9+ acres to the A's for $1. And then if I'm reading this correctly, does that mean that the A's then are transferring the property to the Las Vegas Stadium Authority? And my question is, why go through all of that instead of the real estate investment trust just turning it over to the Stadium Authority? And since it is going through the A's, if you could please let me know what the benefit tax write-off or what it is that the A's get for being that sort of pass-through. Thank you.
Assemblywoman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, there's no inherent benefit. The A's are acquiring that property in fee simple from the landlord, if you will. In doing that, they also have other obligations, demolishing facility, building some infrastructure, doing some things such as that. That property upon which the baseball stadium project will be constructed will be transferred to the Stadium Authority Board in fee simple. Until such time as they're ready to move forward with the project, the Senate Bill 1 that's in front of you merely provides the opportunity for this project to move forward, right? If the project doesn't move forward for some reason, obviously they would not be inclined to transfer that property, which is very valuable, to the Stadium Authority Board. Once the project does move forward, the transfer of that becomes an asset in fee simple to the Stadium Authority Board that is then an asset of the public that's owned by the Stadium Authority Board. The concept that there's somehow a benefit for them to transfer it, like they're a straw man sitting between those two things, there is no benefit. This is the same structure that existed on Allegiant Stadium. In that particular case, though, we didn't know where the stadium was going to be located. So wherever it was that they acquired that property, they too had to turn it over to the Stadium Authority Board, because at that point, the public owns that asset and will continue to own it even after the stadium is constructed.
Thank you. So just so that I have it clear in my mind, so when the Real Estate Investment Trust, if this all works the way you're saying, when the Real Estate Investment Trust turns it over to the A's, I know you say fee simple, but that's just a title. Is there a dollar? Is there a cost? What's the financial obligation? And then if this all goes through that way, when the A's do have it and then they fee simple it over to the Stadium Authority, is there any monetary value that moves towards any entity involved in that? Thank you.
Assemblywoman Steve Hill. The Real Estate Investment Trust owns all 36 acres that are there. They are willing to transfer that property at a low price because they believe that it will make the other remaining 27 acres more valuable even than the fair market value of the land that they are providing. The opportunity for the A's here is just to receive inexpensive land, and that allows the entire financial structure of this deal to work for them. There is no other benefit to the A's than that. Yes, I believe that's the case. It's not really something they are required to disclose to us, but our understanding is that that's right.
Assemblyman Koenig.
Thank you, Chair. So I represent District 38, which is the middle nothing of the state, the western half of the middle nothing of the state. So I represent the rural of the rurals. And my constituents have a hard time seeing how any of this is going to benefit them. I mean, there's construction jobs, but that's not going to them. There's stadium jobs once it's built, that's not going to them. I mean, I can see how bringing in tourists, that money's going to go into the general pot. But the one thing that we've talked about, and there's been multiple questions, is about the community outreach with the community benefits. Is there any plans, or what benefits can I go back to my constituents out in the middle of nowhere and saying there's going to be some community benefits that affect the rurals?
Assemblyman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I can pull up the community benefits plan, and I don't know that I'm going to cite it perfectly here, but I know that in the sections that deal specifically with things like working on some of the baseball and softball fields, it includes both urban and rural elements. And I can pull it up here. I'm sorry, I was just getting my computer set up, and I can look at other places where that is. But in the conversations with the A's, they're actually the ones, and again, it probably was from conversations associated with others, including folks like you in this room, that they wanted to include some of the rural elements. You mentioned, I think, what is going to be the most significant of the impacts, and that is the revenue that's generated as a result of the increased tourism, gaming taxes, payroll taxes, room taxes. Many of those inure directly to the state's general fund and are distributed disproportionately to the rural communities throughout our state. So I think the combination of those two things, is it a direct benefit the same way it is to Clark County? No. But is it a benefit? Absolutely.
Thank you for the answer. I just wanted something on the record that I could take back and say, yes, we're going to receive something.
And Assemblyman Steve Hill, if I could just add one other point to what Mr. Guerra correctly pointed out. The intent that the A's have had all along, and they have been asked to make this more clear in the community benefits agreement and have agreed to do this, is that the scholarship and internship program will be available across the state to all NC institutions and all folks in Nevada.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. In Section 26, it talks about contracts, small business, local business, contracting, subcontractors, general contractors. I know that there have been discussions with our labor partners about PLAs, and what I don't see in this section is a legislative commitment that those jobs are jobs from people in the state of Nevada. And from my perspective, and I think from others, is current residents of the state, people who have been here 2 or 3 years already, not folks who come to do work, because we know that our residency requirements are very low. So I'd like you to speak to how we can ensure, and if you all are willing to add language to that effect, that these jobs will be folks in our state, that the small business opportunities will be for folks who are already residents here, that have been residents here for 2 to 3 years already, and that we will not have people coming from out of state taking advantage of our very generous residency requirements to become residents and taking these jobs, and then you all counting that as local jobs.
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, understand the question had not come up previously. There are a number of requirements around the project, and you're correct, there are not residency requirements in this bill. My experience has been, I spent 20 years in the construction industry, that while it is a somewhat transient industry, and when times are not great in other states and they are good in Nevada, that we will see some come in from out of state in order to work on these projects. Certainly a majority, and typically a vast majority of the workforce in the construction industry are local. There's been enough work to keep them in Las Vegas for a number of years, even through the pandemic. My sense is that there would be a very high percentage of locals by that definition that are doing the work.
Assemblywoman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, if I can just add one additional element to offer to your question. In section 26 that you were referring to, subsection 2B specifically requires that the business not be temporary and is operated in Nevada for not less than 4 years before entering into a contract and agreement. So respecting the fact that the crux of your question was largely around the employees, the small local businesses have to be a business that existed in the state for the prior 4 years. Obviously, many of those will have employees working for them that are also residents of the state, but I just wanted to add that one little piece.
Thank you. That still doesn't address my concern, and that is if you would be able to willing to tighten up the language to be more specific. Just because a business has been operating in the state for 4 years does not mean that they would not look out of state to fill positions. Just because a union is in the state of Nevada, registered and local, doesn't mean that they would not hire outside the state. And I think you can understand my concern, because if we don't have this specifically laid out, we will lose opportunities for apprenticeships, for pre-apprenticeships, if people outside the state can fill this. And I think that it needs to be very clear that that's the case. Thank you.
And we will go next to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question has to do with section 22.2H. It's page 9. It's basically the lines 21 down to about 29. It has to do with the term adequate contribution when it comes to specifically the impacts of transportation, and then also with this study of the infrastructure. Will part of that be a discussion of what happens when there are multiple events on the same night of a very popular corner in Clark County? And then also, if possible, if you could touch upon the timeline of that construction as it relates to slide 11, where the stadium would be open it appears on 2028. Would the construction be at that same time from the Nevada Department of Transportation?
Assemblywoman Anderson, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Paragraph H that you mentioned was developed in conjunction with Clark County. The language that's included in there is the amendment that you see is language that specifically came from them to make sure that, as Mr. Hill said in earlier comments, every major project has to go through a high impact project process. So I think from that perspective, the idea would be those things should be addressed because the county, as the host jurisdiction, is in the best position through its public works process to make sure that all of these issues are addressed as part of that process. Parking, utilities, airport operations, all of those type of things. The second half of your question is really one about timing. And I think the timing element here that is critical is that this has to be put in place before a development agreement or as part of the development agreement that exists with the Stadium Authority Board. So because the no bonds can be issued before the development agreement, lease agreement, non-relocation agreement, and the community benefits plan are all in place. Now I realize you're just asking about one of those, but that actually has to be put in place in advance of the project receiving the first dime of public money. In addition to that, just again, I may be answering your question too long here, but the other part is even the transferable tax credits require that some of these things be put in place. For example, the bonds be issued before they can obtain the first tranche of those dollars. And so from that perspective, I think that the ability for the county to mitigate any of the potential transportation issues directly to your question is created by the fact that that high impact project has to be put in, that agreement has to be put in place before all of the other things on our timeline takes place.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And I did not clarify who defines adequate. Is that a decision made by the Stadium Authority? Is that a decision made by the county, or would that be addressed in those same documents that you were just referring to? Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me that time for clarification.
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, just like every high-impact project in Clark County, that would be Clark County's responsibility, and they have the authority to determine whether to issue a permit as a result of that high-impact process.
Assemblywoman Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And gentlemen, thank you. And team, thank you for the presentation. My question is going to be a little bit different in that it's about the attendance projections. I understand the numbers that you share with us and the average for the league, as well as the average for the A's over the past 10 years. I've also looked up those numbers, and it seems as though in the years 2018, 2019, the A's had attendance at approximately 20,000-ish, and I know that's below the 27,000 that we're looking to, but those are the highest numbers I can see going back, and I understand that there was COVID. And now we're projecting that there'll be 27,000 in the new area, and one of the things that has to have a direct impact is the success of the team. In those years, the team was much more successful. Over the past, and we know the team is really having some challenges right now, but over the past 5 years, the team has struggled. And when the team struggles, people don't show up. People love to come to Las Vegas, but people aren't going to come if the team is really bad. And my concern is that the attendance projections are based upon assumptions that are unrealistic. Can you talk a little bit about that? How are we going to make sure that attendance gets up to 27,500?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, yes. A big reason that the A's are looking at other cities, they're looking at Las Vegas, they're not looking at other cities, just one, is because of the stadium situation in Oakland. The environment around that stadium is not an attractive one right now for people to attend games. And when they have been good, they are below major league average there. They know that when we bring events, whether that's sports or concerts or trade shows, there is greater attendance in Las Vegas than there is anyplace else for a similar event. They are only projecting their attendance to get to league average. And they are investing an unprecedented amount in a baseball stadium. And I know, are committed to bringing a winning team to Las Vegas. Now, some years that works, some years that doesn't, but they're committed to doing that. They're committed to investing a great deal of money in order to build a world-class stadium in an environment that is going to attract locals, certainly, but also in a city that attracts more visitors than any other city in the United States. And we think that combination will get them to that attendance number. But also, as I mentioned earlier, the rest of what they project is substantially less than what we know is going to happen at that stadium. This is an asset that the LVCVA and the community can use to help bring more events, certainly, than the 8 ticketed events that they talk about in their numbers in this presentation. And we think that is also going to make a big difference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question in particular was the commitment to the A's, not the other. That's 81 events. How do we know the A's are going to be better? It's great to hear the commitment. We don't see that reflected in the bill, and I'm wondering if there's some way that can be reflected, because otherwise the assumptions are based upon things that are just not going to happen.
Assemblywoman, I don't see how that could be reflected in the bill.
Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So many questions and so little time. The projections are great. They're rosy, but I've heard, even in this building today, I've heard that, the state will be on the hook, if this fails, or no, it'll just be Clark County, it'll be on the hook, if it fails. So 2 basic questions relating around that. One, are all of your projections based on accepted accounting practices? And 2, who is actually on the hook for the record if this fails and goes sideways on us?
Assemblyman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Generally speaking, when you think about generally accepted accounting practices, that's an accounting concept, not really a projection concept. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that somehow this was sort of a gap statement in some way or another. Are the analyses reflective of and standard industry practices relative to estimates and projections? Absolutely, they are. They're backed by a substantial amount of research and, frankly, a number of firms having taken the time and opportunity to work through those. So, from an analytical standpoint, the number of folks that have gone through it, the adjustments that have been made, leaves me very comfortable in answering the first half of your question. The second half of your question deals specifically with what happens if the revenues fail to meet expectations. How does it sort of flow through? You sort of have that on the public side, and you sort of have it on the private side too, right? The A's are going to invest $1.1 billion. If they fail to generate sufficient revenue, obviously that will be a poor investment for them. I think your question was more specific on the public side. What happens there? In the events that revenues come in under expectations, right, we have 1.5 times cash coverage that exists. 1 times coverage going to principal and interest, the other half that is available to make sure that, if the projections are rosy, as you said, and they come in under expectations, you would still have another third of the revenue that would be diminished relative to that before you'd have to go on to any additional source of revenue to get there. As Mr. Hill said, there are elements, I realize folks feel like sort of this 50th percentile in terms of attendance feels somehow aggressive, fair enough. I think, as Mr. Hill said, on the other side of the ledger, the number of events that are outside of baseball is probably significantly underestimated relative to that. But holding all of that to the side, what happens next? In the event that the revenues come in, the 1.5 times coverage is not enough, there will be 0.5 times coverage that comes from a state backstop, right? A line of credit, if you will, that if there's a lean year or a lean 2 years, that can be accessed, has to be paid back through the waterfall. In the event that revenues come in so low that they are less than 50% of what was actually expected. So that is to say, you not only didn't get the 1 times plus the cash coverage, plus you also had to use another full half times coverage that's held in the line of credit, at that point, there is a full year's reserve that has to be utilized. And after that is fully depleted, there's another full year's reserve that has to be depleted. So in the event that you had what would be the equivalent of 4 consecutive years of generating 0 revenue from the project, at that point, it would be the full faith and credit of the county that would be responsible for ensuring that those payments were done. Now, as Mr. Hill indicated in an earlier response, the state backstop would still exist during that period, so it'd sort of be split between the state and the county in terms of ensuring that the bonds continue to be paid.
And members, we do have legal on the way to come down and respond to that question as well. They will be here shortly, but we'll come back to that question of who's ultimately on the hook. But in the meantime, I want to continue to take questions, so we will go next to Assemblyman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the work that you guys have been doing to get us to an agreeable place. I am going to the community benefits agreement, and I appreciate that a lot more work has been done on this. I have a couple of things. Well, I'll ask one at this time, and we'll see where we end after that. But so as I understand, the A's will be playing in the Las Vegas ballpark for a period of games, potentially during the transition period. If that is the case, I'm curious to know what type of community benefits will be in place for that transition period that we could use as kind of an evaluation period about what type of relationship that we're getting involved with. My biggest thing that I care the most about as we look at such a major and significant investment, I'm pretty sure that financially we can figure it out. It'll work, right? That's my gut. That's what I believe. We're an entertainment town. We bring people in. We can fill stadiums. But with this long-term commitment of 30 years, possibly longer, what type of relationship are we going to have? And I see there's been work done on the community benefits, but I would like to know, one, what type of community benefits will roll out immediately, and then additionally, have we discussed any particular clawbacks if community benefits are not met according to the agreement?
Assemblyman Miller, Yolanda King for the record. The initial rollout of the community benefits plan is noted in section 10 of the term agreement and subsection C, where it states that there will be a minimum contribution of $500,000 per year to support the community needs, and this would be prior to obviously the opening of the stadium. And that was an attempt from the team to show commitment to the community early on rather than waiting for the stadium to be completed.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate that, and I see that, and I think that is great. But I mean, additionally, beyond the money, right? What type of relationships and partnerships are we going to be able to have in our communities prior to? And this issue is because I know that there's a cultural issue with the relationship between the leadership of the team and the community there in Oakland. And so I want to ensure that when/if this team makes it to Nevada, that we are creating a new culture and a new relationship. And I think that starts with whatever game they play on day one, whether it's in the first stadium or it's during the construction phase or potentially this interim phase where, and I may be wrong if they're not planning to play in the Aviator Stadium right now, but if that is the case, what does it look like? How are we building a long-lasting positive relationship for our community?
Yolanda King for the record. So part of that engagement that the team is committed to, it starts with going throughout, touring Nevada in general, and gaining an understanding of what the needs are. Particularly, they've discussed the underserved community, not just in just Southern Nevada, but it's throughout urban and rural areas. Talking to the community, talking to the various local governments, particularly as we talk about the rural areas, as well as the underserved areas, and just getting out there and talking to the community, talking to nonprofit organizations, local governments, and understanding the community, understanding what the need is. So that has been a commitment that the team has committed to in terms of, if this passes, they are going to start and continue that conversation with the community and getting out there and being known as Nevada's team and not necessarily just a Southern Nevada team. So they do plan on continuing with those conversations throughout the entire community in Nevada.
Thank you for that. And I know that, so then my next piece would just be the final piece of that, which was what type of clawbacks are we looking at? Have you guys thought about that? Is anybody discussing what that would look back if, say, for example, somewhere in the review period, the community benefits agreement is not met? What is the actual consequence to the community benefits agreement not being met?
Section 20, excuse me, for the record, Jeremy Aguero with Assemblyman Miller. I'd point you to section 23, 9, and 10 of the legislation as amended there. In section 9, there's a specific requirement for remediation in the event that it's been determined that they're failing to meet the requirements. The expectations of the agreement and also the expectations of the Community Benefit Oversight Committee. I'd also point you to subsection 10, and in subsection 10, it specifically requires a remedy that I think is pretty significant. It actually allows the Stadium Authority Board to take legal action for specific performance or, I suppose, damages in the event that they fail to meet the expectations of the Community Benefits Plan.
And we do have Mr. Powers here from legal, so I would ask if one of you down there could make a seat for Mr. Powers. And Mr. Powers, I know you were en route, but Assemblyman Gray had asked the question of ultimately who is on the hook if, I think the question was if this doesn't work out, if this goes sideways or goes south. So if you could provide us from a legal perspective your analysis of that question based on the mock-up of the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Kevin Powers, General Counsel, LCB Legal Division. For the benefit of the viewing public, the LCB is a nonpartisan agency. We do not support or oppose any particular policy, viewpoint, or piece of legislation. However, we do provide the legislature and its members with objective legal and fiscal and policy advice, and then the legislature is free to use that advice to perform its constitutional functions. With regard to the question from the member, and this is related to sections 29 and 30 of the bill. That is the heart of the financing structure of the bill. I need to explain both how the bill works and why the bill works the way it does. To do this, we have to understand some basic principles of state and federal constitutional law. Under Article 4, under Article 9, Section 4 of the Nevada Constitution, the state cannot assume the debts of any county. What that means is the state can't pledge its full faith and credit as a guarantor or surety of the county. In addition, under Article 9, Section 3, if the state does engage in full faith and credit debt, then the state has to meet certain constitutional requirements. It has to impose a specific tax. The tax has to pay off the bonds within 20 years, and that bond issuance with other outstanding bonds of the state can't exceed the constitutional state debt limit. So in sections 29 and 30, there are provisions to ensure, one, that the state is not committing its full faith and credit to the repayment of the county bonds because the state constitution prohibits it. In addition, the state, through its legislature, is not surrendering any of its sovereign powers to enact or amend or repeal laws. That means the legislature in the future is free to adjust the state component of the revenue stream, can lower those taxes, it can repeal those taxes, and there is no recourse by the bondholders against the state. And the reason for that, again, is the state is not pledging its full faith and credit. The result of all of that is that currently under the bill, there will be a state component, a revenue stream from the state. That will be a continuing appropriation as long as the legislature doesn't decide to change that in the future. When the county issues its bonds, those bonds are only pledged with the full faith and credit of the county. What that means is the county will have a contract with the bondholders, and that contract will be protected by the contract clause of the federal Constitution, so that ultimately the bondholders' recourse is only against the county. What that means then is if for some reason the state revenues fall short, the reserves are not there to cover that falling short of the state revenue, the credit enhancement isn't available to cover that falling short of revenue, means that the county has to ensure that those bondholders are paid. So if the county has money available in its bond redemption fund, it can use that money to continue to pay the debt service on these county general obligation bonds. However, under the worst case scenario, where the state revenue isn't at the expectations that are needed, reserves are depleted, and the county doesn't have enough money in its current redemption bond fund, then the county would have to increase taxes in the county to cover those county general obligation bonds, because again, the contract clause requires the county to do that because they have entered into a contract with the bondholders pledging the full faith and credit of the county. But again, to emphasize, this bill ensures that the state's full faith and credit is not pledged for the payment of the county bonds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Assemblyman Gray, did that answer the question that you had?
It kind of hemmed around it also, but as long as you brought up the Constitution, I'd like to do a quick follow-on with that. Is that okay, sir?
Since we have Mr. Powers here, please go ahead.
Thank you. So you brought up the Constitution, sir. I'm wondering, and I won't belabor the point by reading everything, but Article 8, Section 10, if the letter of the Constitution isn't, exactly applicable, I believe the spirit of the Constitution is applicable. How are we getting around that? It just doesn't jive with me, or a lot of my constituents, more importantly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Kevin Powers, LCV Legal Division, General Counsel. Article 8, Section 10 provides that no county shall become a stockholder in any joint stock company, corporation, or association, whatever, or loan its credit in aid of any such company, corporation, or association, except railroad corporations, companies, or associations. To understand this constitutional provision, you got to understand what the economic circumstances were in the United States in the early 1800s. These kind of provisions were not in most state constitutions in the eastern United States. And with the development of the Industrial Revolution and railroads, there was a tendency for states to loan their credit and back private obligations for the construction of railroads and other improvements like canals and dams and ferries and bridges. Because there was no restriction on using state or local credit to back private obligations, what would happen is the private companies would fail and the state and local governments were on the hook for paying back those bonds. So due to there was a Great Recession in 1837, which caused many of these defaults to occur. Following that, state constitutions started including provisions like Article 8, Section 10. What those provisions mean is that a county government can't loan its credit to back private company bonds. What it can do, though, like it can in any other circumstances, is put its full faith and credit behind county bonds for a public purpose. Improving economic infrastructure is a public purpose. So constructing this stadium improves economic infrastructure. It's a public purpose. The county is putting its general obligation bonds behind that construction project, but the stadium authority will own that stadium. The private company will not own that stadium, and the county bonds will pay for that stadium. Once those bonds are paid off, then at that time, the Major League Baseball team will have the option of seeking to acquire the stadium and take over control. At that time, there has to be a third-party appraisal for fair market value, where then the stadium authority transfers ownership of the stadium to the Major League Baseball company, but for fair consideration. So that's a lot more history than most of you probably wanted, but that's what I'm here for. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. I still think we need to get continuing legal education during the legislative session. Mr. Powers, I think you said you can stay around, but I wanted to ask anybody who has a question pending right now, if it's a strictly legal question, that would be for Mr. Powers. If you can maybe just raise your hand and let me know that. Otherwise, we'll excuse him from the table for the moment, and we'll see if anything else comes up. So I don't see anyone. Mr. Powers, thank you for being here and for explaining that. So we will continue along with other member questions, and the next question will come from Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. And my question is about the project funding structure and how the $1.1 billion versus the $380 million for Nevada to pay, how that was determined. Because as you had mentioned, this is a very iconic corner, probably the most iconic in the state or the country, I would even have to say even in the world. And as you also mentioned, it's very valuable. So why are we giving you $380 million and you're not giving us $380 million to be there?
Assemblywoman Gorlow, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I think at the heart of your question is adding value for everyone, right? You're right. That corner is iconic. It has as much value as it is arguably one of the most important corners, certainly in our state. And as you mentioned, in destinations anywhere, people know Las Vegas Boulevard. In terms of what is required to make the stadium work from a fiscal perspective, we're talking about putting $1.5 billion into that asset. From that structural standpoint, as you saw from one of the charts that I showed, the private sector investment is a huge amount of money, $1.1 billion. And I don't want to diminish in any way the public support that comes from that. That's $380 million. But let's imagine, to your question, that we kind of reverse the model. We essentially say, hey, look, you're going to need to pay us $380 million in order to construct this asset, in which case the project goes from $1.5 billion to, let's call it $1.9 billion overall. It becomes infeasible in order to make that project work. In addition to that, in some ways, I think you're getting what you're asking for in this, because the project itself generates $3 of revenue for every $1 that the public is putting in terms of the incentive. That adds up to about $360 million of net present value today. And so if the project is never constructed, those incremental visitors never come, they don't spend the amount of money, we don't get the same level of taxes. So from that perspective, I would suggest that two things. One, if we were to reverse the model, as the question suggested, you would make it infeasible. No one would enter into that project. We wouldn't get it anyway. And by constructing, as it's currently structured, the net present value benefit to the state of Nevada is significant and generates the type of revenue that I think your question was largely leading to, that we would like to receive for the investment and development of such a project.
And Assemblywoman Steve Hill, if I could just add a couple of points to the correct ones that Mr. Aguero made. Las Vegas will be the smallest television market in Major League Baseball if they move to Las Vegas. The revenue that comes to a baseball team or any professional sports team varies. Ticket revenue is a part of it, but just a portion of it, certainly less than a majority of the revenue. Particularly in non-football sports, regional television revenue matters a great deal. The other thing that matters a great deal is suite revenue. And in a small market, you have less eyeballs. So for example, the largest markets right now, probably in the $120 million a year range for their regional television contract. That in Las Vegas is probably somewhere between 40 and 50 million, so there's a disadvantage there. There are also less corporations in Las Vegas than in most large cities to purchase suites, which is where a number of those, a great amount of team revenue and help in building a stadium comes from as well. So what you'll see, and there's that kind of explains the page that we had in the presentation around the size of the market and the percentage of participation from the public in helping to build a stadium. When you have those small markets, it's incumbent, if the city actually wants the facility built and the team there, for that city to help more than in like New York, where those were the other stadiums in that on that sheet that we're able to build with less public money than we're proposing here. Proportionally, though, this is an exceptional deal for Nevada.
May I do a follow-up, please, Chair?
If it is related to the original question and then you don't feel that it was answered, as long as it's not a new question.
It's not a new question.
Okay, please.
I think my point is more to that being such an iconic and valuable corner, that there are a lot of investment opportunities we could go down the path on and not have to pay $380 million for. If we were to do another casino, another Tropicana that's bigger and better, we would then not have to pay $380 million. We would get room tax, we would get alcohol tax, gaming tax, food tax. All of that would be included, and we wouldn't have to give anything up. So again, I appreciate what you're saying, but ultimately I think that that's a really valuable corner, and you're wanting us to pay a lot of money. So thank you. Not quite sure that was a question.
We will just leave that as a comment for the time being in the interest of other questions. We have a question next from Assemblyman Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question's got to do with, okay, we're kind of like the mistress here now, and everybody knows that the shiny wears off eventually, and I'm thinking down the road of when we end up with a dirty dog of a stadium like they have in Oakland in 20 years, and the cost-benefit analysis makes the A's go looking for the next mistress. Why are we under Section 22.5, why isn't there a full clawback of public funds, or at least of the non-refundable transferable tax credits, so that we may have to tear down a stadium that's an eyesore on the Strip, and we should be able to be compensated for that. Thank you.
Assemblyman Carter, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. So a few things to offer relative to that. I think first and foremost, we've talked a little bit about the non-relocation agreement, right? The non-relocation agreement, if they choose to leave at any point during the next 30 years, they have to pay off the bonds, they have to pay off the refundable portion of the transferable tax credits. So if they choose to leave early, the public, through the Stadium Authority Board, should own the stadium free and clear, including the land, the underlying land, which in the last question is obviously quite valuable. The second piece is there is a specific provision in the development agreement section that talks about the fact that the developer, the A's in this case, are required to maintain the standard of the building all the way through the lease. They are required to do that. The Stadium Authority Board is specifically put in place to enforce the laws that this body passes and those agreements as they exist. And the law specifically states that it is the A's responsibility to do that. They get called before the Stadium Authority Board every single year with a capital plan, and it is the responsibility of the Stadium Authority Board to ensure that that standard is upheld. And they have, even though there are specific capital requirements and capital contributions, they are required to meet that standard all the way through the end of that 30 years. Now, you make a really good point about the fact that assets age over time. There's no doubt about that. But there's been a lot of thought that's been put into this particular legislation, and I would argue the agreements that were created as a result of the Senate Bill 1 that gave rise to Allegiant Stadium to insulate our community and this asset from exactly the problem that you're concerned about.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for being here on the hot seat. First, I just wanted to say that I am concerned with the taking out the Nevada treasurer from the ex officio. I think that would provide a lot of oversight, even to my colleague, Assemblyman Gray's point. I think that would help. But my question is, while I appreciate NC universities being part of this, absolutely, this is literally adjacent to land owned by UNLV. In fact, just to the east, that frontage right there on Tropicana is owned by UNLV. Have the A's reached out and talked to them about possibly working with their headquarters, possibly operations, and moreover, the sports management, there's a master's at actually UNLV. Would love to see a partnership with that. And then my final part of the question is, is the UNLV baseball team going to be able to play at the stadium? Thank you.
Assemblywoman Steve Hill. To my knowledge, the A's have not begun the process of thinking about where their headquarters would be. It's, a few years out. We have been focused on this part in order to allow the project to move forward at all. If Catherine has an opportunity to come back up and I'm wrong about that, she can correct me, but I think that is the answer to the question. They have talked with UNLV. UNLV baseball right now has a great college stadium, does not really draw a fan base that could afford to regularly play in a stadium of this size because it just costs so much to operate. But I know that there have been some conversations around allowing that to happen periodically. And I'm sorry, the other question you asked? Oh.
Got it?
Yes, thank you. Yes, the community benefit agreement kind of calls out internships, scholarships, and developing mentorship programs around all around sports management.
For the record, Jeremy Aguero, it's Section 11, Assemblywoman.
Right, we'll go next to Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hill and Mr. Aguero. It's clear how much work has gone into this proposal and presentation. So my question has to do with, and I hope I haven't missed this somewhere, but with the specific location being in statute and with the proximity to the airport, has the project received final approval from the FAA and the Airport Authority? And what is the option if for whatever reason they might deny?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill. The A's have talked with the airport. I have also spoken with the airport. The FAA only has authority for air use. They do not have land use authority. That resides with Clark County. What the FAA will do if a project is either in consideration or going to be in place, will weigh in, express concerns, necessary or potentially necessary mitigation that can alleviate those concerns, or at some level say you can't fly on the north runway or something along those lines. That conversation has at least been had at some level, and the way the attitude of the runway works with where the stadium will be and the direction in which the stadium will be directed. The concerns really are not height. It is light pollution, something that would blind pilots, so they will have to mitigate that, and the A's have agreed to do that. They don't want fireworks used that would rise above the stadium, and they've agreed to do that. No lasers. Those are the flight issues. They also asked us to add, and we have in the amendment, the language that is
The safe and efficient airport operations.
yes, that is directly FAA language that speaks to those issues.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm looking through the documents that were provided that have been worked on over the last couple of days, and the one thing in there that I asked about was not included. This is the obligation for a family-friendly work environment. There is nothing in here that obligates that outside of maybe a living wage. And that's hugely concerning to me given the provocation for taxpayer dollars, and in this state where we struggle to keep families uplifted and together, that wouldn't be an obligation for using these funds. That being said, I have a specific question related to your food security plan, which is mentioned once, I think, in each of these documents, maybe not even in the amendment in its entirety, although I'm briefly looking through the sections where it might be. What is the plan for the food security obligation? Is it going to be equitably distributed across the state or considered in both our northern communities and in Clark County? I think you keep saying that we're going to see benefits across the state, and I believe several of my colleagues are having a hard time believing that. When you're asking for a tax incentive that can eat into those social services that the rest of the state do use, right? It's hard to justify for my community, which you're actually removing a benefit away from us because the stadium is 2 hours away from where we currently are, and it will be 7 or so hours away with this move. And just concerned that is a placating statement and not a reality. So specifically to the community benefits agreement and the obligation to those social services investments, which is minor considering how much the ask is today. What is the obligation or plan for equitable spread of those benefits?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, a couple of things. One, this is a good investment for all of Nevada, and there will be more tax revenue to spend on social services across the state if we do this deal than if we don't. I think Ms. Aker talked about the team's commitment to food security and also the team's commitment to not having this just in Clark County and just in Las Vegas. But and she can come down and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is an ongoing conversation too. It is what's there is what's been decided so far, and I don't want to lead you on. I don't want to just give you a placating statement. She has said that, the A's have committed to that, but that's as far as the conversation has gone so far. The Oversight Committee needs to be put in place. That conversation needs to be had, and the contract that will be put in place needs to be put in place, and that will be a part of that conversation.
And maybe forgive me for my bluntness, but I really have a struggle seeing how this plays out in the benefit for our northern Nevada communities. We hardly have enough as it is to take care of our communities across the state. We've done a fantastic job this last session, I believe, with one of the best budgets that we've ever seen. But when you're asking for a monetary ask to the size that's being requested in this, a commitment that isn't included in any of these documents, that doesn't include the people who are in my community asking for what's the plan, it's not enough. And I have continued to ask for these family-friendly, community-based commitments, and I just have failed to see them, and it's disappointing.
Assemblyman De Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Hill and Mr. Aguero, for your presentation. And I have a question that, I'm asking this question from the purview of the general audience at large. And that is the fact that there is a strong argument made out there that sometimes these publicly financed stadiums are problematic economically, and that they're particularly problematic for states that have had issues funding education. So my question is how can we respond to these sort of criticisms? I think there's adequate literature out there too. Just this week I read from the Berkeley Economic Review and from the University of Michigan Journal of Economics that publicly financed stadiums were problematic for not just economies, but were particularly problematic for state economies that have been faced with educational deficits, which I believe Nevada is one of them. So what would your response be to such a question? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Assemblyman. For the record, Jeremy Aguero. I'm going to echo what Mr. Hill said just a moment ago, right? If this project is not constructed, the revenues that are flowing in are zero, right? The bonds that are going to be issued are going to be repaid from the revenues generated by the construction and operation of the stadium, right? That's how that revenue comes in. There's not a dime that's taken from K through 12 education. There's not a dime that's redirected away from K through 12 education. Now, the point that was made earlier, I don't disagree with. If you weren't using those dollars to repay the bonds, those dollars could be used for some other purposes, including K through 12 education. But the other side of the equation is the incremental visitor dollars. Under the pupil-centered funding plan, the vast majority of the funding for K through 12 education comes from local school support tax, property tax, general fund allocations, and a handful of, more than a handful of other revenue sources. You take something like the local school support tax and the fact that visitors contribute probably about 23% of our taxable retail sales, at least in the Southern Nevada region, right? The ability to generate those revenues that come from that visitor spending means that our schools are going to have more money, not less money. I answered the question earlier relative to the out-of-state folks that want to be critical relative to the use of public dollars for projects like this. And again, I'll make the same statement. They are 100% right in their application of it in the vast majority of areas in which stadiums and arenas are constructed. But in areas like ours, where you have this tremendous amount of visitors, it plays out differently than it would otherwise. And I will offer Allegiant Stadium as, I think, a shining example of what has happened. Every one of the same arguments being made about that. We heard about education, we heard about it. The bonds require about $30 to $35 million a year, maybe a little more than that now, to be generated in order to pay the principal and interest on the bonds. Last year, based on the known value of visitors that went to events at Allegiant Stadium, it generated about $72 million in tax revenue that was generated as a result of that. Those are dollars after the principal and interest has been paid that are going to our schools, that are going to public safety, that are going to state and local governments for social services and all of those other things. And as much as we want to have the conversation about the fact that it doesn't benefit us statewide, it absolutely does. Because the revenues that are generated, most notably along the Las Vegas Strip, inure to the benefit of the state's general fund and are reallocated throughout the entire state of Nevada, largely based on need or per capita or per student or something along those lines. And in doing that, we collect the revenue in one area and we distribute it throughout the entirety of the state. And so whether it is this facility that's being constructed or others that we can look at that have had measurable, demonstrative effects that are similar, I would suggest that we will have more money, not less, to help hopefully push our education system forward.
Assemblyman Steve Hill, and if I could just add to those points. Economic development is, for Nevada, is about bringing money from outside of Nevada into Nevada. And what we're projecting is that this stadium will do that at a rate that activity and that money that comes in from out of state, which is the only thing that generates economic development in a state, will also produce these tax revenues that will be substantially more, 3 times as much as what is invested. What these articles that are out there are claiming is that we're not going to be able to do that. No place can do that. And in Kansas City or in Buffalo, and I mean, there's great places. And there is a community benefit to a stadium that is separate and apart from an economic development benefit of a stadium. And, community pride, rallying around your team, having something for all your citizens to do might be a great reason to spend money on a stadium. But we're discounting all of that in this conversation. We're just talking about the economic and fiscal generation that stadium will cause. These articles say that we can't do that in Las Vegas, and that's just simply not right, because we have all of these people who choose to come when there's something that they want to come for. And all we're saying is we're only going to increase our visitor volume by 1%. And if that stadium increases our visitor volume by 1%, pardon the pun, it's a home run. That is going to create that 3 times investment for the state and local governments.
Assemblyman Orntlicker.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to for your presentation, also to Ms. King and Ms. Aker. My concern had to do with this return on investment that's so critical. So you've answered part just now. Which would be the opportunity cost? Would we get a better return on our investment in public health or drawing down federal dollars? And your response is, I gather, we wouldn't have those dollars because we wouldn't have these visitors bringing the new money in. So in your view, I gather you're saying there's no opportunity costs. But the other part, I just want to make sure on your model, if I'm looking at slide 38, it looks like if we just look at the annual operation, 17 million a year, 30 years, that's over 500 million. It sounds like you're saying that alone would pay back our investment, which does seem inconsistent with what the other economists are saying. And you suggested that the difference is they're not taking into account the incremental visitor. That's what makes this different. But even without the incremental visitor, it seems like you're in a different page than other economists. So could you explain, am I reading that properly, that you think we would pay it back even without one incremental visitor?
Assemblyman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I don't know the answer to that question because I haven't run it in absence of that. I can tell you that I have looked at models that do not have visitor-related activity, and the numbers are much less significant in terms of that return on investment. Is it possible that it could be close to a break-even proposition? I suppose, because of the mix of sales tax and the taxes, the live entertainment taxes that we have in the state of Nevada. But I'm sorry, sir, I haven't sort of run an analysis in absence of the revenues that we do know exist here. I am not contrary to the conventional wisdom in other markets. Frankly, I've done a fair amount of analysis throughout the United States, and there's places where projects make sense and places where projects do not. In this particular case, I didn't do an analysis that looked at it in absence of revenues we know will be generated as a result of our tax structure here in the state of Nevada.
Assemblyman Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. First, I just want to say that I was a little disappointed earlier to hear that a listening tour was conducted during the last year or maybe more. And it seems like what was said on public record earlier seems to be very brief of that listening tour. As someone that works closely with the community on a daily basis for the past decade, the behind-the-scene work to engage the community seems to be below standard with this project. One of the major issues that I did not see in this community benefit agreement and it's something that we work together as a legislature for the past regular session, was language access. And language access is really missing from this program. So in terms of, you know, a deeper dive of the community conversation for our state, I think folks that behind the scene on this would learn that we need to be innovative. As Mr. Aguero said earlier, we need to be different, right? Different from everyone else so that we can lead the pack. So my question is on the CBA, you know, in terms of innovation, this seems to be a very basic document, right? For a large investment that we have as a state, we seems to be very, very check the box on this types of language that I see here. So on section 6, when you talk about livable wage, it's like one sentence. And livable wage is there, but is it sustainable, right? If we're gonna have construction worker and operation worker, living wage, I mean, healthcare, it's a standard these days, right? It's not a premium like the old days. It's standard now because you want to raise the quality of life. You want to raise the ability for folks to go to work and also be able to get to work. You know, like transportation subsidies, you know, pay time off, all of these things. I think there could be more to this livable wage concept, but I just feel like it's very basic here, and it's not in the bill language at all. So hopefully one of you could help me address this part, because as the entertainment capital of the world, and if we're gonna set the way for so many to follow, perhaps this particular component is still missing a lot of important elements.
Assemblyman Steve Hill, start with the first comment. I think Ms. Aker made it clear, and if she didn't, I'll help make it more clear. She started a listening tour. It is in anticipation of hopefully having a project actually implement so that you can implement a community benefits agreement and engage in the community. It was not our intention or the A's intention for that to be complete by the time we came to this session. And they have said that it's not complete, and they will continue to do that. The way the law had been set up, and we've listened to you over the past several weeks that, hey, the plan you had in mind, which was let's get this approved and then let's go put a community benefit agreement together, wasn't being done fast enough. And so we have worked hard with you over the past several weeks to get to the point we are now. This is not, in my opinion, at all a check-the-box document. I went through 6 community benefit agreements that were given to me as examples of the top of the class that across the country around stadiums. Many of those, by the way, were for stadiums where the public investment was substantially more than the public investment that is being contemplated now, virtually none of which was ever going to be repaid. So I took and have worked with the A's, with all of you, with Ms. King, to create this document, which is not complete either. This is a much stronger bill because of the input that all of you have provided. It is also a much stronger community benefit agreement than we have ever had in this state, and I think it will be a national model by the time we're done.
Mr. Hill, if you could address my question on livable wage in terms of what you can do to kind of just more than what you wrote here. Thank you.
Assemblyman Steve Hill, I apologize for that. The real answer to this is virtually more than 90% of the jobs that will be around the stadium will be covered by a collective bargaining agreement. Many of those jobs are through the culinary, and I think everybody here would agree that they pay more than a livable wage, they provide benefits to their employees, and this will help in that effort. And I think you'll hear from the culinary later. Certainly you can talk to them more about this, but these folks work at the convention center, at where I work as well. And many of them are concession employees, for example. And they do move from working in the convention center to working at T-Mobile Arena to working at Allegiant Stadium. The wraparound aspect of bringing Major League Baseball to Las Vegas during the season, when we currently don't have anywhere near as many professional sporting events, is going to help all of those employees more easily achieve year-round employment and the number of hours through their contract that it takes in order to achieve those benefits. It virtually assures that all of these folks will have the benefits that are in the contract with the culinary and other collective bargaining agreements. So for virtually all of those employees will be well above the livable wage standard.
So thank you for going into that a little bit. I just hope that in the continual phases of this discussion that we would add more strong language into what you just said, because it's not just up to an entity to, like the culinary, to just negotiate for their membership, but I think the MLB or the A-team as an organization can set the standard without, so that you can, when you connect with the culinary members, that you already have certain things in place so that it's even better for folks and for Nevadans to be able to participate and benefit from this project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Assemblywoman Mosca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my question is for Ms. King. And I thank you all for all your hard work and everything that's been added into the community benefits agreement. And on section 23, number 6, it says the baseball stadium community oversight committee constitutes a public body. So my question was, is the purpose that it will be truly a public body where the community will come together and share the thoughts that they want into this term sheet so that we can get the community feedback, or is this the term sheet we're going to go with?
Assemblywoman Mosca, Yolanda King for the record. Yes, that was the entire intent of putting in there, that the Community Oversight Committee would be subject to open meeting laws, so that those meetings would be open to the public and they can provide their input with regard to the benefits.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sort of going off this community benefits agreement, I want to go to the other end. When I read it, it's a list of binding terms. And I go through there, and there's some very specified requirements in here. And you leave out some others. I have multiple questions almost on every line, where my colleague from the South talked about just livable wage not being detailed enough. I'm asking, you go into such detail that is this truly all there is, or there should be added? And I'll give you an example. You talk about universities under education. You only talk about universities from the South. The North is left out. And I see that regularly throughout this page, that excluding Clark County, the remaining part of our state is forgotten about. And as a state, we are contributing state money to this program and should also be addressed in this. And then going back to the front page, when you list about who can work there, you never talk about not being well-versed in construction business. I find it very hard to meet some of these requirements and on the number of people, the types of people that have to be employed. It doesn't say if that can't be met, what is the out clause? What's the results? What else do you do? Under appreciation, you talk about everybody in the moon, but you leave out our first responders. You talk about women's veterans. You don't talk about veterans, period. That's what I want to know, is this is so specified and detailed in here. How binding is it, and what can be added, or do we have to write the whole world in there, or can we do more generalities? And don't forget the North, please, anything above Indian Springs.
Assemblyman Steve Hill. While you weren't here, I did address the university topic. That's quite all right. The A's have been asked to list all instead of just say these two and then everybody else generally. They've agreed to do that. That will certainly be a part of this agreement. As I mentioned to Assemblyman Nguyen, this is just the first part of this process. This is intended to help inform a conversation that will take place with the Community Oversight Committee, will ultimately be a contract with the Stadium Authority that can be enforced, that has the opportunity to add to these things. These are a lot of what is identified specifically has been requested individually by members of this body. They wanted to see that on a piece of paper. The A's certainly value veterans, and that means all veterans, the first responders. They do these things already. These were just specific. They wanted to see that particular commitment in writing now, but this will be expanded. They're going to provide a community suite every game, 81 games, for a different group, a different nonprofit organization, or different groups like that each game. They will spotlight groups each game. Lots of opportunities to celebrate all out there who deserve to be celebrated. These are just some of the specifics that were asked by this body.
So if I may say, what I hear from you is this is not a list of binding terms. This is just a generalized statement to stimulate conversation. Is that fair summation, Mr. Hill?
Assemblyman Steve Hill, it is binding in what is there. It is not limiting by what is there. It can be expanded upon.
So there'll be more to come, in other words.
That's right.
From us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the presentation and for what I know is going to continue to be a lengthy day ahead of us. I want to speak specifically to Section 23 of the legislation, and I'm looking at page 12, subsection 2A of Section 23, and it requires workforce diversity, and that's mentioned in here. But as of right now, I guess my question is, what considerations have occurred to ensure that we're looking at workforce diversity for both low-wage earners as well as high-wage earners? Because to me, it is important that we have a diverse workforce, but it doesn't just mean that that diversity are doing the lowest wage jobs. And unfortunately, that's often what we see in corporate America. So I'm just wondering what conversations have been had and what that looks like now. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Torres, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The community benefits plan as it's currently structured has a couple of targets in it relative to the percentage of workers that have to be minorities, women, veterans, all of this number of groups. Those numbers are pretty high overall. As what we saw in with a similar approach, although substantially lower targets under Allegiant, what we saw is that diversity became a target for every subcontractor and group within those during the construction and then during the operations of Allegiant Stadium. Is it perfect? No, I don't want to leave you with that impression, but I think that the targets at the level that they are going to require that every contractor and subcontractor participate and go out and find folks to participate. I think when you look in there and you talk about opening up the bonding requirements, when you talk about having mentorships that are brought through, those type of things are designed specifically to give folks opportunity to be lifted up. Now, you talk about the idea of specific workers in different categories of jobs or occupations that are there, and we don't want to make sure that they're all crammed down at the bottom. At the same time, giving business owners that have the opportunity to grow and develop, because what we do know is that businesses that are minority or veteran owned or women owned, for example, have a tendency to give much greater opportunities to minorities and women and veterans and those that are disabled, those type of things. And so I believe that the targets are high enough that there's going to be a natural incentive to do exactly what you're asking for.
Thank you. And if I could request that later on we get the information too of what that diversity looks like right now for the Oakland A's, what that diversity looks like for the top and the bottom of workers, because I think it's really critical that we have people that are wearing the suits in that building that are diverse candidates, as well as individuals that are cleaning the stadium. Thank you.
Assemblyman Urich.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all of our presenters for taking the time to put on this very thoughtful presentation and to be here and answer all of our questions here today. One of the largest criticisms that I've been hearing from my constituents regarding this sort of project is why we would invest such a significant amount of our tax dollars into a franchise, and more specifically into an owner who has not done his best, it would appear from the outside, to invest in a team that would succeed. And you've given some explanations here today about some of the challenges in Oakland that they've experienced there. But in light of what is kind of making Nevada different, right, from these other municipalities elsewhere where these sorts of projects have failed, Nevada, and more specifically Southern Nevada, Las Vegas, is known as the entertainment capital of the world. We know how to put on a show. Everything we do is at its best, from entertainment and food to everything we do. And so I guess my question is what assurances do we have from Mr. Fisher that he is willing to make the type of financial investment that is required so that the A's have a good shot at being the best to compete down in Southern Nevada and therefore make this sort of investment worthwhile? Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Steve Hill. And if you'd like a job promoting Las Vegas, just give me a call. I've talked to Mr. Fisher. One, I will say that he is investing the most money in a baseball stadium ever. He is investing in Las Vegas. He knows what our city can do for the A's. And he has told me he is committed to bringing a winner to Las Vegas. There's, as I said earlier, there's no really way to contract for that, to put it in a law that he will do it. But it makes sense that he wants to. And it makes sense that if he's going to spend this kind of money, he's going to want it to be successful. And I believe that will happen. I think Las Vegas will help make that happen.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for this presentation. I think this is the third time I've heard it now. But I have to say that I disagree with a few things that you've said today. You've made statements that without this project, there would be no revenue generated on that corner. And maybe I misunderstood what you said, and if I did, I'm sorry. But the corner on Tropicana and the Strip, it's been stated a number of times today, is one of the most valuable corners on the Strip, in the state, and quite possibly in our country. So something else is going to replace the Tropicana if the current owners decide to demolish it. And no matter what that is, if it's a casino, if it's another sports project, maybe an NBA stadium, that may not have the financial ask that's included in this current deal. So I think that corner is going to make money no matter who goes there. It's a new, shiny thing that you say people are going to come to Nevada to visit. No matter what goes on that corner, it's going to be the new, shiny thing on our Strip. And whatever that new, shiny thing is, it's going to bring good paying jobs for our brothers and sisters in labor and culinary, no matter what goes in. So this legislative session, this body has had more money than we have ever had in our history since I've been in this building to deal with our budget. And we have passed some amazing legislation out of both houses, bipartisan legislation that only got across the courtyard and got vetoed. Right? And you're asking us to give a lot of credits in addition to credits that already come off our books. So we're going to have to add these credits along with additional credits take those off the books before future legislative bodies will even be able to think about putting together another budget and may not have the dollars that we have this current legislative session. So, once this construction is complete in 2028, but the team is going to come here and they'll be playing at the Las Vegas ballpark, correct? How much money will we generate in those years leading up to the time? And will we get that money, the state and the county, while they're playing at Las Vegas ballpark? So at least we get something out of this deal and not just taking money off our sheets.
Madam Speaker Pro Tem, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The playing at the Las Vegas ballpark is one potential option. I don't think that is an option that has necessarily been determined that that is what the A's are going to do. I know it's come up here a couple of times. I have talked to them many times about what the options look like to play games in the interim. That's been one of the options. I would not want to suggest it's been the option or even the top option. In the meantime, during the construction of the facility, the community benefits plan requires $500,000 every year to be contributed and to be dispersed, utilized throughout the community to do that during the construction side. Forgive me if I'm over answering your question, but during the construction of a $1.5 billion project, there are many jobs that are created. There's taxes that are generated both on construction materials and labor. And so those benefits will all inure in advance of the A's actually throwing out the first pitch at the new stadium. To the early portion of your question relative to the utility of that property, if I suggested, I want to make sure that it's clear for the record, I'm not here to suggest that the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard won't be developed. Of course it will, and you are 100% correct. I would only offer that, at least based on the plans that are there, what this does is add another dimension to what is going to be developed there. I think that what the private sector has recognized through this is that the advent of having a baseball stadium located there increases the value of that asset and potentially creates something that would otherwise not be creatable. To your point, there could be 100 other things that could be creatable there. But this is a bit of a unique opportunity based on the structure and what we're talking about in terms of the development. So if I suggested anything other than that, I want to make sure that I am not intending to take it to a level that you suggested I may have suggested.
And the only reason that I mentioned the Las Vegas Stadium, because in your presentation on page 27, it specifically mentioned the Las Vegas Aviators, that they would not be forced to move while the A's were playing there. So that's why I did mention that. But wherever they play, if they're going to be in Nevada playing while the stadium, if this bill passes, and I think everyone knows how I feel, I made that very clear in the first time we met, and you haven't convinced me yet, but I'm hoping you do. Will the state of Nevada and Clark County, if they're playing in Clark County, be making revenue? And what do you anticipate that revenue is until this stadium, if this bill passes, where we won't be making anything? And that's my opinion. Will we be making revenue in those years leading up to the first pitch at that new, shiny, pretty stadium on Trop and Strip?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, just to be clear on the stadium and where they can play conversation, where Major League teams can play is subject to collective bargaining. The Players Association has to agree to play wherever they're going to play. So if it's an alternative location, and the A's have committed to have that conversation and to work to have some of their games not only at the ballpark, but potentially at the ballpark in Reno as well. but they can't commit to it because they have to enter into a collective bargaining conversation with the Major League Baseball Players Association. They can and will and have said that they will have exhibition games for certainly in the ballpark there. But that's just to be clear about that. They would like to be able to play some games in Nevada prior to moving into the stadium, but can't make that commitment right now because of that.
Okay, would anyone else like to ask a question in round one of question asking? I've looked at my sheet here. Most of you have asked a question. Some of you have sneakily asked several questions. Don't think I didn't notice, but I'm trying to give a little bit of leeway, but want to make sure that nobody else who hasn't asked a question yet wants to ask one. If so, just indicate by pressing your speak button. I don't see anyone pressing your speak button, so as advertised, we are going to go to round two of questions. So if you have asked a question and would like to ask another one, if you could please light up your screen. And a reminder that questions are welcome, but not required. And I'll give this a second. This is kind of like playing, it's kind of like playing Price is Right. Okay, we will start with Assemblyman DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. And again, appreciate your presentations. I'm going to stick with financial, because I think that's what I think about the most. In the bill, the development partners and the A's put up $100 million as the first spend. What I want to know is the value of the property, the 9 acres, included in that $100 million, or is that $100 million cash that they'll put up in addition to the land?
Assemblyman DeLong, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. It is in addition to.
That was the way you ask a question. Thank you, Assemblyman. We'll go next to, let's see here, Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I felt like I did good on the round one, so I wanted to make a statement and then also ask a question. My first statement just goes to the CBA with respect to appreciation nights and awareness days. And I just wanted to offer, I'm hoping that the but not necessarily be limited to is not intentionally disregarding our indigenous communities. We do have 28 nations in our state, and most importantly, the land that the stadium is being asked on is that of the Nuwu Southern Paiute people. With that, my real question, well, I just wanted to make sure that was out there. That was really important to me. But my question is, and I've been struggling with Section 29, so this may go actually to Mr. Powers as opposed to you guys up there, but if you have the answer, that's great. Where I'm struggling is where I understand we can't pledge the proceeds as a state, but as I'm understanding is we're giving up state revenue to pay down the bonds. And when I'm reading Section 29, I'm just having a hard time with that. Like, so for example, it goes in that the county commissioners shall pledge and as part pay the principal of an interest of the bonds. And under subsection A, in the items listed there under, include a list of our state revenue, so like the state's share of sales tax, as well as now the LSST goes to the education fund. And I'm struggling to read in there that the state money is really going to go to pay back the bonds. So if Mr. Powers could probably help me out there, I'd appreciate it, and maybe somewhere else too. I may be overthinking this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Kevin Powers, General Counsel, LCB Legal. The way the payment is set up for the bonds, state revenues are available to pay for the bonds as long as the legislature continues those revenues. So as long as those specific taxes listed in the bill are in place as a matter of law, they will be collected from within the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District, and they will be given to the county to use to pay back the bonds. My discussion earlier was to ensure that that is not a pledge of the full faith and credit of the state. If the legislature were to repeal one of those taxes, that revenue stream would fall away, and then the other pockets of money would have to be looked to. If the legislature reduced the rate of one of those taxes, then that money would fall away, and again, you would have to look through a different pot of money. For example, the MBT, the modified business tax, has a provision in it that adjusts the rate depending on how other tax collections are done. And that's an automatic revision, so sometimes the modified business tax will be lowered automatically as a matter of law. This bill acknowledges that that could happen. If that state revenue isn't there, you look to the other revenue sources, and ultimately, if those revenue sources aren't there, you look to the general obligation of the county to pay back its general obligation bonds. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. We'll have a question next from Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make clear that I understand how transferable tax credits work. So if I understand this properly, so there's $180 million in transferable tax credits. The stadium or the A's can take up to $36 million in transferable tax credits each year. So what a transferable tax credit is, if I understand it properly, is it's kind of like a coupon, so that the A's could use it to pay down their taxes, or they could sell it to any other taxpayer in the state. They could sell it to a resort casino, they could sell it to a manufacturer, they could sell it to anyone. And then that entity uses that coupon to not pay their taxes. So if that entity owes $25 million in taxes in 1 year, they can use the coupon to not pay it, which essentially means that the way that this is the $180 million in transferable tax credits can mean that it's $180 million in taxes that we lose sort of right out the gate as soon as they're either used by the A's or the coupon is transferred to another entity who then uses it to not pay their taxes. And then on the flip side of that, if the A's use the coupon, the transferable tax credit coupon, then when they sell it to another entity, that becomes private money for them to use to pay for construction. I don't know if it could use to be paid for the $500,000 for the CBA, or they could use that money to build and construct the stadium itself. So I don't know if that also means that they sell the transferable tax credits, they get funding, that funding is used towards that $1.1 billion that they've pledged to pay down the stadium, or to pay for the stadium, if that's how all of that works. But then that $180 million, I understand that is potentially refundable, but not required to be refunded. But that is part of the $380 million bucket that we have to pay back. So we then, all of the money that's raised in the stadium, every tax, like for the hot dog, for the beer, for the Uber driver, for the t-shirt, for everything in that stadium area, I don't know if that means, as Mr. Hill, you've mentioned previously, if you extend the boundary for the parking garage, if anything that's raised in the parking garage goes into that as well. But all of that then goes right into the buckets to start paying that down. Though, so we are giving $180 million in transferable tax credits, which could be sold or not sold, but they'll be used. Then we're taking taxpayer money to repay that $180 million in transferable tax credits, along with everything else. Do I have all that correct? Thank you.
Assemblywoman, that was very accurate. I would phrase it as investing instead of losing, but it was well described. The only exception that I would take to what you said is it's not an option not to repay the transferable tax credits. The law is written that the revenue will stay in place until those tax credits are paid back.
Assemblywoman, if I can just add one thing. The A's cannot use the transferable tax credits for their own, to offset their own tax payments. It specifically excludes that from taking place.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I needed that clarification. So then when we are adding the $380 million, the $380 million includes the $180 million in transferable tax credits that we are paying back through the stadium. But then where is, if the A's can't use it, that's $180 million in transferable tax credits that are sold to other entities that then use it to not pay taxes, which means that's negative taxes that we have. So just explain to me then, how is that 180 and not 360 million in tax credits or loss of revenue that we as people in the state are losing? Thank you.
Assemblywoman Steele, you're correct. The transferable tax credit is a certificate that says you don't have to pay whatever taxes are listed in the bill that are eligible not to be paid if you are the holder of that certificate. You're only going to, over the course of 5 years, that does not start until the next biennium, July 1st of 25, you would pass out only $36 million a year in each of those 5 years. And no matter how many times it moves around, there's only one person who can actually redeem that certificate and claim that they do not owe the taxes. So it will only cost the state the $180 million investment over those 5 years. They could sell it along the way because they can't use it, and they can only use it for the construction of the stadium. But it is limited to that $180 million. Just a point on the $380 million in total, that is a cap. It is unlikely that the combination of what we're considering here today will actually get to that cap. The projection on bonding with the state providing the enhancement is about $125 million. The county is providing a $25 million credit toward the development agreement, which would bring that to about $150, and then the $180 million would be on top of that, which would be $330 million, and that's more likely to be in the range that is the entirety of the package, unless interest rates drop significantly between now and the times the bonds are issued, in which case you could issue somewhat higher principal in bonds than we could right now.
We have a question next from Assemblywoman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for the presentation in round 2. I won't be able to sleep tonight if you don't answer this question for me. You had mentioned something about monies going into the bank, and it's sitting there for about maybe 2 years, if I understood that correctly. I want to know what happens to that interest. You know, who gets that?
Assemblywoman Thomas, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. When we were talking about the bank, you're referring to the State Infrastructure Bank. That is the money that is set aside to provide the line of credit, the credit enhancement that we've talked about. If it earns interest, it stays in that account and can continue to be used because the principal and interest payments will ratchet up slightly every year. And so that interest will allow it to grow so that the state treasurer, assuming those dollars are not used, will require fewer dollars to request from the legislature if additional dollars are needed. There's a provision that's included in the amendment that essentially says at the end, at the point at which the bonds are paid off, so let's imagine under a hypothetical scenario, you put the $14 million in, it's never used, that $14 million is $25 million 30 years from now for exactly the interest. Those dollars revert back to the state's general fund at the point at which the bonds are fully paid off.
Assemblywoman, are you going to be able to sleep tonight? Okay, wanted to make sure the question got answered. We'll go next to Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. So, as a social studies teacher, I know math is not my subject that I teach, but some of this is just not quite adding up to me. I know my colleagues have all asked questions about a lot of details, and we're being told to believe that attendance, which has never gone beyond 20,000 attendees, is now going to reach 27,000, that paying $36 million a year in public money is a good deal in exchange for $1.5 million in in-kind donations from the A's, and that somehow a deadbeat owner is going to invest in his team overnight and a losing team will become a winning team. I don't know that those questions have been answered. I think we've seen from my colleagues that those questions haven't been answered. So I'm not going to ask those again, because as a teacher, I know if you keep getting the same answer over and over again from a student, it's time to move on, because you're not getting anything new from that kiddo. So my question instead is on the state-of-the-art clause. So there are numerous references to state-of-the-art stadiums. On page 4, there is a reference in subsection C saying that we need to operate a state-of-the-art stadium. On page 8, there is a reference to first-class premier Major League Baseball facilities. And then on the next page, on page 9, it talks about the costs of development. I know that in many of these deals, state-of-the-art clauses have been inserted as a way of wringing extra public money out down the line. If some other stadium gets some new fancy gadget, then the taxpayer is now on the hook for paying for that new fancy gadget. And so I just want to clarify. On page 9, it says that any and all development and construction cost overruns for the development and construction of the project must be the sole responsibility of the developer partner. So we're all good there. Except that any cost overrun must not be the responsibility of the developer partner if the cost overrun is caused by a change in development or construction mandated by the stadium authority after the execution of the development agreement. So I just want to clarify. Is the stadium authority on the hook in NRS to having this state-of-the-art facility? And if yes, if they say we have to get this because it's in NRS, is the taxpayer then going to be on the hook for paying for that new state-of-the-art gadget for this facility?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, no, they will not.
Speaker, could we get maybe some clarity from legal as well? I just want to make sure on the record that we are not on the hook for that.
That would be fine as well, and members, I would just ask, we are on questions. There may be a time for statements if and when this comes to a vote, but if you could refrain yourself to questions, that would be much appreciated as the chair of the committee. And Mr. Powers, if you have something to add to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin Powers, General Counsel, LCB Legal. The standard in the statute will be a first-class Major League Baseball stadium. As a public body, though, the stadium authority is made up of multi-members who have to assess the balance between what is included in the stadium and the level of financing they have to build the stadium. There will always be that balance. So there will be no obligation to do the most exciting next thing if there's not financing to do the most exciting next thing. So as a public body, they have a fiduciary duty to manage these funds in a way that accomplishes the general intent for a first-class Major League Baseball stadium, but doesn't also contradict legislative intent to fund it at only a certain level. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Speaker. Chairman, excuse me. In my previous life, I worked at an agency that did a lot of capital improvement projects. And one of the things that was part of every one of those that was funded and completed by that agency was to have a third-party engineering firm to monitor the construction of that project. And I have to ask this question on the fly because my colleague asked my question. So this has also been burning in the back of my mind. One of the things that I don't see in here is some type of protection that would ensure that the world-class stadium is being built to those standards. And in that previous life, this third-party engineering firm, their responsibility was to review all architectural and engineering plans to ensure that whatever was being constructed met those world-class standards. I don't see that here. I think it would be important to know whether or not that is part of the plan and where that would be. Is that part of the legislation? Does that come later? Is that something that the LVCVA is responsible for? And the reason that I mention this, and the reason that this is of concern, is the third-party person would help to eliminate some of the concerns of my colleague so that we don't miss things that the stadium's plan might miss that would meet the standards of whatever is world-class, so that we don't have change orders, and so that all the things that make this world-class, which I think is very vague and not very clearly, I mean, it could be interpreted in any different way. You could say that a Kohler toilet is world-class, but you want to put in a beam toilet and say that's world-class. I don't get it. But anyway, where is the governor? Where is the standard, and how is it going to be enforced to ensure that we are not having overruns, that everything is being done to the standard that is necessary for this to be world-class?
Assemblywoman, for the record, I'd like to draw your attention to page 40 in section 33, subsection 2E, that specifically requires the retention of an independent engineer for exactly the purpose that you just set forth. That independent engineer, the same language was utilized in Senate Bill 1 for Allegiant Stadium. That independent engineer was Jones Lang LaSalle, who the developer partner would send all of their materials prior to every pay app. They did site reviews every month to make sure that everything that was provided, was stated, was actually provided. In addition to that, the Stadium Authority Board retains a independent construction representative that would walk the site consistently, would review all of the plans, and would also review everything once it was completed to ensure that the state's interest or the public's interest was being maintained.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. I was going to try to find the slide and look through the papers for it. I can't figure out where it is, so I'm just going to get straight to the point. You mentioned earlier about the naming rights, as well as the very small media market being under the direction and also under the ownership of the owners of the team. Will any of this money also be able to go back to pay the bonds, or is that 100% public money that can be paid? So, in other words, somebody says, hey, here's $1 million. I want to pay this, name the stadium after, I don't know, Carson City. Does any of that money be able to go back to the bonds, or is it 100% public tax revenue that would have to pay back those bonds?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, the revenue that is generated by the operation of the stadium, including the naming rights, would stay with the A's. That is what's needed in order to pay back their investment in the stadium, so that would not be available.
Assemblyman Urick.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for taking our questions. We've answered so many of these substantive questions to varying degrees of satisfaction, I can tell. If you'll indulge me for what I hope doesn't come across as a trivial question. But as a prior law enforcement officer and as a legislator who's prided himself on being a strong advocate for our first responders, on the CBA, noticed in subsection 5, similar to my colleague from District 37, conspicuously missing from that is any reference to honoring or showing appreciation to our state's first responders, our police officers, our firefighters, and our veterans. There's a lot of other groups in there. My question is, were they intentionally excluded? And if not, can you offer some assurances on the record that we will be able to, at some of these events, honor our state's first responders?
Assemblyman Steve Hill, they were not intentionally excluded, and I can give you absolute assurance that they will be recognized at the stadium and at the games.
We'll go next to Assemblywoman Cohen, who is joining us on Zoom. I hope. There we go.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a question about, sorry, let me just get to my notes. So I'm concerned about the bonds being paid off by the 17 taxes listed because of the requirements of the Department of Taxation being required to use commercially reasonable procedures. So given that there was testimony in the other house about the department using commercially reasonable procedures or the revenue being excluded, how do we know that there's going to be funds to pay off the bonds?
Assemblywoman Cohen, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The revenues that are estimated are those that are utilized in the preliminary model are those that have that are easily measurable and easily identifiable for the Department of Taxation. They include sales tax, they include live entertainment tax, modified business tax, and commerce tax. These are taxes which the Department of Taxation understands and in cooperation with the taxpayer are fairly straightforward. I think at the heart of your question is what about some of the other taxes that are not included relative to that? The idea is that as those become more readily identifiable, that they can be included for that revenue to the extent that they're identifiable enough that a commercially reasonable effort can be made to collect them. Let's say liquor taxes, for example, being passed through in terms of an invoice, those will be able to be included. The ability to pay off the bonds is going to be a function of the revenues that are already identified. Both the county chief financial officer, as well, sorry, I should say this differently, the Stadium Authority Board has to identify and provide that those revenues will generate the full 2 times coverage when the state's enhancement is included, whatever that set of revenues ultimately needs to be. Those revenues then go to Clark County that have to be determined to be similarly sufficient both by the chief financial officer of the county and then also the state treasurer to make sure that the revenues that are identified meet the full 2 times coverage, again, when the credit enhancement is included. So the bonds will not be issued unless all 3 of those parties determine that there is sufficient revenue to meet the principal and interest payment plus an additional 50% plus the state backstop.
Okay, I guess I still have concerns because like MBT and commerce tax, what's going to happen if the headquarters are off-site? There's going to be a hard time. The department is going to have a difficult time making those determinations.
Assemblywoman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, certainly if something is going to be administratively too burdensome, there won't be a commercially reasonable way to do it. In the conversations that I've had with the Department of Taxation, I mean, we reallocate modified business tax today for economic development purposes, so we have the ability to identify the situs that's there. Yes, the taxpayer will have to identify the taxes that are paid by that taxpayer for example, the modified business taxes that are allocated specifically to that location. But this happens in other communities. It happens in our state, and I don't have a concern that the Department of Taxation cannot work with the taxpayer to determine a commercially reasonable way to accomplish that.
Okay, and we don't yet know where the headquarters are going to be for the A's?
For the record, Jeremy Aguero, Assemblywoman, a number of the A's employees will be located at the stadium. They have not indicated to me exactly how many or exactly how that will work. For the employees, players, things like that, there's specific language within Senate Bill 1 that says that those employees will be deemed to be at within the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District for purposes of that tax collection.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Assemblywoman, just to follow up on that, Kevin Powers, General Counsel, LCB Legal. Because the businesses that are operating in the sports and entertainment district will be the ones paying the taxes, it's in their best interest to properly segment the taxes so the benefit of those payments goes to the sports and entertainment district and the bonds continue to be paid and everyone in the entertainment district continues to benefit from having the stadium there. So there's a built-in incentive too for those businesses to properly segment their taxes and assist the Department of Taxation and local government in doing so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As you may or may not know, today the Moneyball Act was introduced into the U.S. House of Representatives, which will compel or induce team owners to pay a relocation fee to the state and municipality from which they're leaving. If they don't do that, then they may be placed subject to the antitrust laws. If this goes through, are the Oakland A's still going to come to Nevada?
Assemblyman Steve Hill, I know the A's are committed to coming to Nevada. I'm not aware of that bill, so I really can't answer that question.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope my question doesn't seem too trivial, but what has it been said what this team is going to be called? The what A's? Do we know?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, I don't know the answer to that question either.
Well, the reason I ask is because I got an email from a constituent who thought it might make this a little more palatable to the north if they could be called the Nevada A's, you know, like there's the Florida Marlins and the Colorado Rockies. So is that something we could consider?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, it's really not ours to consider.
Oh, so the A's will decide, right?
Yeah, yes, they will.
Okay, thanks.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So just one follow-up request, because I don't think we need to go into it, but it would be helpful, I think, to have, based on the projections, and I'm sure you already have this, or you could just follow up with me and probably other members of the committee, you know, when under the current projections that have been provided, when the bonds will be paid off, when the transferable tax credits that are refundable would be finished being paid off back to the state, and how much would be projected to, especially with the new waterfall structure, how much would be estimated to go to the Homeless Assistance Fund over, you know, kind of the 30-year period that we're generally looking at. I think that would be helpful, as well as I know there were questions from my colleagues about the stress test and understanding how that would impact bond repayment, transferable tax credit repayment, the inflow to that homeless assistance fund, and impacts on kind of the fiscal and economic impact of the project. So I would just appreciate if you could follow up after the hearing's done with some of that information. The question that I had is, again, some of my colleagues talked about the importance of having kind of a family-friendly aspects to the community benefits agreement. In particular, you know, we've talked a little bit about living wages. I know that there's a mention of healthcare, and that was brought up. You know, retirement, education, both for employees and their families, and, you know, providing those educational and leadership development opportunities to them. But in particular, one of the things that you know, I've seen is that now I believe the bill as amended provides that for certain companies receiving certain abatements of taxes, they would have to have a paid leave policy in effect. And I know this might not be the appropriate question to you. It might be better directed to the A's themselves. But I'm wondering that since this is a proposal where taxes aren't being abated but are actually being redirected to help support the investment in the project, if it's appropriate, that they also have a similar paid leave policy put into effect.
Assemblyman Watts, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Obviously, that legislation that's being contemplated here did not exist at the point at which the models were created, so I don't have an analysis that can include legislation that would have been prospective.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the 1.1 billion portion of the project that you will be financing. You all have stated in the previous hearings that you will not discuss the financing of that. Is that correct?
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, no, that's not correct. That financing has to be proven and guaranteed by a third party before we can request, along with having all the agreements we've talked about in place, all of those things have to be done, including identifying the source and the capacity of that financing before we even ask Clark County or the state to participate with public funding.
So all of that has not been done yet.
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, yes, that's correct. We can't start that process unless this passes now.
Okay. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, again, thank you so much. I'm going to follow up on with my colleague, Assemblywoman Considine, mentioned just in terms of the transferable tax credits, and I know that 120 million of those are refundable, and you said they will be refundable, so that's great. I'm wondering when and how does that happen?
Assemblywoman Taylor, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The way it happens is through the waterfall that we talked about. One of the provisions that is included in the amendment is that the tax rate will continue until such time as they are fully paid back to the state. Under the models that currently exist, there is some repayment that happens very early in the process because the construction generates a fair amount of revenue, so you have some money that flows through the waterfall. Then you have an extended period of time out to, I think past 2035 before enough money is in the waterfall to start making those payments back and generate it. The waterfall is constructed I should say that differently. The waterfall is constructed to take into account if revenues come in over expectations that the state and that the county should benefit as a result of that. Much like what we've seen at Allegiant Stadium, revenues have beat expectations and there's a waterfall that comes through. If that was to happen here, it will dramatically accelerate the rate of that repayment. So while we can run some models respecting the fact that we don't know exactly what the interest rate is going to be when the bonds are issued. We don't know all of the revenues that are going to inure to that, which can have a significant impact on when those revenues will take place. If revenues come in expectations, it's going to be a lot sooner. If revenues hit expectations, it'll extend past the 30-year period in which those revenues will ultimately go to repaying $120 million in tax revenue.
Assemblywoman Steve Hill, and just to add to Mr. Aguero's comments, the fact that this body has added $30 million to the amount that will be repaid delays the ultimate repayment of all of it because it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Orntlicker.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you for answering all our questions so patiently. I want to go back to some of the questions we've asked. Or let me put it differently. We have two questions. Should we invest in baseball? Is that the right thing for Las Vegas? And if the answer is yes, is the A's the right team? Is this the right match? Or should we be thinking other opportunities will come along, whether through expansion, other teams that might be moving? And concerns have been raised. We've gotten lots of emails about people in Oakland who have been troubled by their experience with the current owner. And so you all have assured us that John Fisher is committed. He really does want to make this work. And I think, Mr. Hill, you said before, when asked, is there a way to make that concretize that commitment? And you said you couldn't think of anything, if I'm remembering correctly. But one thing that's troubling when we think about the commitment of Mr. Fisher is that he does have the lowest payroll in the league. And I know there are teams with high payrolls that don't have great seasons. There are teams with low payrolls that have good seasons, but there is some correlation. It does matter to some extent. So one way to concretize this commitment would to say, Mr. Fisher would commit to at least spending the median or 85% of the median, finding that range that makes sure we can count on a competitive team, and if he's committed to doing that, then this should be an easy thing for him to satisfy. Is that something we could put into the bill?
Assemblyman Steve Hill. A couple of things. As to whether there would be potential Major League Baseball opportunities that would be better than this one, I think Major League Baseball would hesitate to say anything that would feel threatening to our process or disrespect our state. But it's my strong opinion that if we don't take this opportunity that we have now, we will not have an opportunity with Major League Baseball anytime in the near future, and near being quite a while. I do not think that putting some type of payroll commitment into the legislation would be acceptable to Major League Baseball or the A's. This is, by the way, a competitive process. They are not looking at other cities right now, but have gone to the owners' meetings in New York in order to protect the unique opportunity Las Vegas has to attract Major League Baseball to our state. And so I think that request would be beyond what Major League Baseball would be willing to allow.
Yeah, if I could just ask a follow-up. Yeah, I appreciate why people may be concerned, but this gets back, I mean, as you've indicated, and we all recognize, we are a very desirable city for Major League Baseball. We're not, well, I won't name other cities that want a baseball team, but they don't compare. People want to come to Vegas, and we are very attractive to Major League Baseball.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Speaker. I'm kind of back to my previous line of questioning and expressed disappointment. I am curious about investment in affordable housing. I did a little digging into the proposed legislation and passed legislation unanimously in California on the development of the A's stadium proposed for the port there. And there was a component of affordable housing built into that. And I'm wondering if in this proposal, what do we call it now? Clark County Homelessness and Prevention and Assistance Fund. Are we expecting that to assist in developing affordable housing, or was that completely left off the table in this piece of legislation?
Assemblywoman Peters, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Clark County would have broad discretion relative to the use of those funds. The only thing that I would offer is that that fund gets fully funded if the project overperforms. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that somehow that's going to be sufficient revenue to address an affordable housing issue in Clark County. The other part of your question relative to other projects, whether it's ones that were undertaken by the A's or others, many of those are real estate related projects. The stadium is one portion of a much larger development. We see that in the NFL. We've seen it in Major League Baseball. This is not the case. This is a development in a highly defined, highly urbanized area. And so there is not ancillary real estate where a similar type of investment would take place.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sort of going off some of the prior questions, going to page 7 of, I'm looking at the mock-up proposed amendment 30001 to Senate Bill 1. On page 7, it talks about the Clark County Homeless Prevention and Assistance Fund. Can you give me a little more detail on that? And is any of the money going in there, it talks about what they can do, but is it subject to audit? Will there be any reports given back to us on what the money that is being contributed by the A's, what their actual performance is of this fund?
Minority Leader O'Neill, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Clark County has plenty of audit requirements that it goes through as a government. I'm sorry, did I say something incorrect?
I'm asking about us. I'd like to know how that money is spent, or have the legislature have input or response back to how that money is being spent. Because when I read it, it says prevent homelessness. It's a great overarching statement. Homelessness, unfortunately, has been with us since before biblical times. It talks about help individuals and families regain stable housing. I'd like to know how they're doing that. What is reporting back? It's just, I feel this money that the A's are giving forth, what we're giving forth to support the A's, there should be a response back to the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kevin Powers, LCB General Counsel, for the record. Although this particular piece of legislation doesn't require the county to report on this particular fund, as was mentioned, the county has reporting requirements that it must comply with under the law, so that will be public information, how much money is taken in, how much money is spent. In addition, both during session and during the interim, legislative committees have the power to investigate any matter that's related to potential future legislative action or legislative business. So any legislative committee within its jurisdiction could request members of the county to come and explain how revenues are being used from this particular fund. And in addition, even if those county officials were reluctant, all legislative committees have the power to subpoena. And if that comes up, please contact me.
Thank you.
Assemblyman Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to follow up on, I was again going over the pages of the bill. I know that my colleague from District 37 has asked this earlier, but I want just to follow up and ask, does it hurt the legislation to add back the ex officio board member, such as the treasurer? So much of the language in this bill involved the state treasurer, but yet the role was eliminated with the amendment. If the state will be on the hook for this, would an ex officio position like the state treasurer that is so involved with the financial component to be an effective oversight with the stadium authority on top of the IFC? I mean, if we're going to be transparent about this, right? And the treasurer with the infrastructure bank and with all of the financial component to ensure that we're following every step of the way, that I'm not sure why that position was taken off. I think from a statewide perspective, having a lot of the North interests represented, as well as a constitutional officer who, you know, position is responsible to be the guardian of our state dollars. So if you could explain that, that would be great.
Assemblyman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I don't disagree with anything you just said, and no, it does not diminish the bill in any way whatsoever by having the treasurer act as an ex officio member of the Stadium Authority Board.
So just to be clear, you are going to be okay adding that back on?
I have no objection, sir.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had a little bit of time to follow up on the previous line of questioning relative to the community benefits agreement. And I've spoken with my county commissioner who represents the district that I'm in, and have not really been able to identify the list of organizations or community members that were met with, and I'm confused. I heard the A's have been in town about a year working on a community benefits agreement. Then I heard we were working on a community benefits agreement just in the last couple of months. So I'm confused. And I just really want to get on the record where we're heading with this. So I'm curious to know if we can get a list or data. Is there something to support where you went and who you talked to, just so that we have that and I can wrap my head around it before we go to vote? I think that's really going to be important for a number of folks that have weighed in my email in the time that the hours that we've been here. So really important. I'm curious to know if you have the data. I'd love to see that. And then relative to the community benefits agreement term sheet that we have, I understand that it's not binding. It's binding to a degree of what we have originally, but it can be expanded upon as we go into the community. I appreciate that. But I think there are a couple of key pieces that we need to get into this document before we go forward. One of them is on page 1, number 3, under subcontracting and vendor diversity. I think that we call out nonprofit organizations initially, but then in the second part of that paragraph, we don't identify nonprofit organizations as contractors that can provide services or supports. I think that's just an interesting piece, that we have nonprofit organizations that actually provide support services and contracts throughout our community, right? And I could call out a couple of them, but are doing contract fulfillment and should be recognized as contractors. I think we've seen them alienated inadvertently in other ways and other agreements throughout our community. So I would not want to leave nonprofit organizations out as possible contractors. And then on page 2 under number 6, when we talk about living wages, ensure employees working in construction or operations are paid at least living wages. I would want an and in there, like we have to make sure all of our employees receive living wages and that they're not accessing Medicaid, state Medicaid rolls, right? So they're not costing us money to do this, that we are paying fair wages is really important. And then under number 10 on page 3, we call out teenage sex trafficking. I think it's important that we realize that people of any age can be taken advantage of, so that we probably should work on getting rid of teenage. And then people with disabilities, police, firefighters, et cetera, I think you've heard that throughout the day, are not included in those paragraphs. I think we need to add that in to make sure we're not excluding anybody inadvertently. Those are really my comments, less of a question, but I think important to see the revisions and have that data before we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Steve Hill. I do know that the A's are developing, just going back to the calendar and developing that list, and we'll get it to you shortly. And I don't think anything that you just recommended would cause any objection, but we'll ask the folks working on this to get with you. Thank you.
Assemblyman De Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for your continued presentation and answering these questions. I know it's been quite a long afternoon. So my question is this, is really pertaining to the private funding dynamics. I know this is kind of a tangential question, but it is, I think, of great public interest. I know there's over $1.1 billion that are going to be coming from private funds. And there have been issues with funding drying up. I mean, we have 2 projects on the Strip currently, the Dream project, I believe, and then the Fountain Blue, which is sitting there not being worked on because the funding dried up. We had a huge problem with the city center the development in the early 2000s. So my question is this, what's going on there with the private funding? Do we know who is bringing these proof of funds to the A's? One. Number 2, can we be assured that this project will be completed on time? And then number 3, during the actual construction phase of this project, can we have some sort of transparency in regards to what's going on with those private funds that are going to be utilized to complete the project? Thank you.
Assemblyman De Silva, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The project, the bill specifically requires that if the project's not constructed in 60 months, absent force majeure, that there's reversionary clauses that go in. With regard to the transparency element associated with it, this was the question that I believe was asked by Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong relative to transparency throughout the process. There's an independent engineer. Every month there's a pay application process, what has been completed. There are receipts that back that up. There are reports that have to be done, all of which are required here. I would point you to page 41 of the document relative to, and paragraph F that talks about the developer partner has provided a financing commitment. So you're right, there's always uncertainty in the financial markets, but the developer partner, in order to move forward and actually access any public money, has to show where its financing is going to come from, and you'll see the numerical paragraphs that are underneath paragraph F talk about an irrevocable deposit of cash, closed construction financing, irrevocable letter of credit, that has to be there and show not only where the financing is going to come from, but the financing is irrevocable, so that when the public monies come in, that there's no opportunity for the private sector not to provide its share necessary to have the project completed.
Do we have anybody else for round 2 of questions? Sorry. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Mr. Hill, Mr. Aguero, Ms. King, and Ms. Aker, and Mr. Powers, thank you so much for being here with us. I think we started this morning, I can't remember, but this morning and into this afternoon. And members, as always, if you have questions for them after we leave here, you are free to reach out to them directly to ask questions. But for now, we will excuse you all from the table, and we will open this up for testimony in support. As indicated previously, we will be taking testimony in support in person, both here in Carson City and in Las Vegas. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to provide testimony in support, and I will be timing, and I'll let you know when your 2 minutes has expired. And when I do that, if you could just please wrap up your comments. So we'll start with testimony in support here in Carson City. Actually, let's go down to Las Vegas first, because we're still working out the logistics up here in Carson City, but I see we have 3 at the table in Las Vegas. So whoever would like to start first down in Las Vegas, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Jim Gibson, the chairman of the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, in addition to being the chairman of the Clark County Commission at this time. I am happy to be here with you, and we appreciate the work that is going on in an effort to get it right. Today, as you consider the legislation before you, which reflects the great work that has been done, I want to ensure that you're informed about the role Clark County has played in these discussions. Our sole focus has been to uphold the prudent financial practices of Clark County. This legislation compels Clark County to issue bonds for the financing of the stadium. Throughout our conversations with the A's, it's been imperative that the terms of a bond issue meet the standards that the county would require for any similar county bond issued, specifically to the amount of the bond funding, the revenue to debt service coverage requirement, and the amount to be held in reserves. County Manager Kevin Schiller and Chief Financial Officer Jessica Colvin have briefed each member of the board individually throughout this process. That's our board, and have carried the perspective of each forward as they have worked on behalf of Clark County to negotiate financial terms that reflect the financial practices of Clark County that have been established over years and decades. It is the perspective of the county's financial experts that include Kevin and Jessica that the deal before you is fiscally sound. The county's commitment to issue about $120 million in general obligation bonds was not agreed to lightly. Clark County's ability to fulfill this request is possible because the terms of the bond require: 1, a debt service coverage ratio of 2 times, a debt service reserve equal to 2 years in average of average annual debt service, and 3, the replenishment of the reserve fund throughout the life of the bonds. These terms are in place to reduce the risk of a default to the investor, and more importantly, to prevent any burden to Clark County residents. Additionally, the county will provide up to $25 million toward the cost of infrastructure associated with the development of the site. This could include costs associated with utilities, roadway or pedestrian improvements, fire, police, or other requirements to be identified in the development agreement between the A's and Clark County. That is because this is a high impact project, and we will work to enjoy or to learn about the issues and then enter into a contract which will cover Clark County and the A's and spell out specifically the requirements that they will have to meet in order to develop this high-impact project. I think it's important to note that the structure of this agreement is for a timeline of 30 years. And while those of us who have crafted the agreement will no longer be in our positions, elected, appointed, or otherwise, Clark County's financial contributions are intended to withstand a lot of unknowns throughout this time frame. And while I'm not able to predict the stadium or the A's will be successful, I am certain that what you have before you for consideration is the best version of an agreement to bring the A's to Clark County with the protected support of public financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Gibson. I did give you a little bit more time there due to Clark County's intimate involvement in this project. And just so you know, I have encouraged members who have questions of the county to either reach out to you or to county staff. So they may be reaching out to you shortly after this hearing or into tomorrow. So if you could just let your folks know that they might have some incoming questions, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we're anxious to be able to have any kind of a dialogue that makes sense.
Thank you so much. Let's stay down in Las Vegas. Whoever would like to go next, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. My name is Virginia Valentine with the Nevada Resort Association, and I am here to speak in support of SB 1. We're happy to see today the amendments that were made to improve the transparency and the accountability and the empowerment of the community benefits part of the program, also the governance changes. I won't repeat myself with previous testimony, but I do just want to summarize by saying that the A's are making a very large investment. I believe the stadium's been right-sized. This is a great project for tourism in Nevada. The tourism industry, of course, this gives visitors a new reason to come, to stay longer, and when they stay longer, we know they spend more money. So we believe it will create jobs and raise more money for local and state coffers. So we urge your support of the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Assembly. My name is Aaron Ibarra. I'm with Southern Nevada Building Trades. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. We represent over 30,000 families here in Southern Nevada. I want y'all to keep in mind that we have a 15% apprenticeship requirement with the A's. That is significant, right? Not every project that we build has that percentage of apprenticeship requirement. Apprenticeship requirements allow us to actually open up our apprenticeships and go and do outreach in our community to build those opportunities that many folks don't currently have, right? And as someone that was born and raised here, having those opportunities to be able to get a good paying wage and not have to always go through the university setting is significant, right? So just keep that in consideration that we have a 15% requirement and a 5% first year apprenticeship requirement, which is significant that you don't see that in very many projects in Southern Nevada. So we hope that you support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Assembly. My name is Daniel Lincoln. I'm with the IUPAT District Council 16. We represent over 1,700 painters, glazers, and floor covers here in Southern Nevada. This is the third time that I've testified in support of this bill or a bill that's like it. And I must say that as I sit and listen to all the testimony, specifically in opposition, I actually am a little bit excited because it sounds like we are finally going to get some allies in battling big business and billionaires. When I listen to the opposition testimony of some of the progressive organizations, they're finally starting to understand the importance of holding billionaires accountable. See, that's what we do as labor unions. And if you notice, it's the labor unions that are testifying in support of this bill because we are the ones that are actually out there doing it, right? We are the ones that are walking the lines. We are the ones that are going to court and arbitration. We are the ones that are sitting at the negotiating table, actually holding CEOs and corporations accountable. This is what we do. We are forced to negotiate with CEOs and corporations and billionaires because we fight for our members. We are the experts at this. We know a good deal when we see one. We are not in the business of cutting off our nose to spite our face. And when there's an agreement that's good for workers, that's what we do. And so I would ask that the members of this committee of the Assembly understand that when labor is testifying in support of the bill, it's because we know it's good for workers. This bill is a jobs bill. Make no mistake, a vote against this bill is a vote against good paying union jobs, and I would urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair, Assembly. My name is Phil James. I'm the president of IATSE Local 720. It stands for International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. It's been mentioned a lot today that we are the entertainment capital of the world. We are the union that makes all that magic happen behind the scenes, that makes that entertainment happen. I cannot add any more than what the gentleman to my left just added. That was a great speech about labor. So with that, I'm just going to say ditto, and we support this bill.
Thank you for your testimony.
For the record, my name is Anna Wood. I am Government Affairs Chair and member of the Board of Directors of the Las Vegas Asian Chamber of Commerce. Good afternoon, Speaker Yeager and members of the Assembly. Since 1986, the mission of our chamber has been to serve and represent the professional interests of Nevada's growing AAPI business community. With a population of more than 355,000 Asian Americans, AAPI is the second largest minority in Nevada. The Asian Chamber of Commerce supports the creation of a sports and entertainment improvement district. This addition to our city will not only bring national baseball to Vegas, it will strengthen businesses and build community. Currently, there are more than 22,000 Asian-owned businesses in Nevada. SB1 will enable Asian small businesses and entrepreneurs to grow and succeed through connectivity and opportunity. It will provide employment, growth in leadership, engage community by enhancing mentoring programs, youth and seniors program development, showcase diversity, bring new talent and various other ethnic groups to our city, as well as attract additional tourism from Southeast Asia and worldwide, and increase the overall productivity, which will further Nevada's economic growth. Public and private partnership is a win-win for all. With more than 20 years in community development program experience, I can assure you that the A's previous commitment to community is solid, as shown by their commitment and engagement in Oakland, coordinating lunch and learns with community members, A's teams donating time programs, and scholarships to schools such as Lincoln Elementary, Lincoln Park, and other organizations such as Oakland Asian Cultural, Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, and Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Stop Asian Hate, Family Bridges, and many other countless ones. Collaboration and working in unity towards the good of our community is number one for Nevadans, our youth, seniors, and all residents. As our city continues to grow, and the growth of its incoming businesses, what better way to highlight the best of Las Vegas and the best of communities across America than by revitalizing that specific area of Las Vegas Boulevard South? It would also increase occupancy at nearby smaller hospitality establishments and boost our economy. We are unique, we are strong, and in closing, let us set aside our differences, let us move forward, and leave our children with a keepsake of what America is all about: hardworking people, immigrants, small businesses, entrepreneurs, union workers, seniors. Let us bring baseball, a longtime sport, and bring together the joy of having families at these games. It is for those reasons that I respectfully ask for your support of Senate Bill 1. The return on your investment will be multifold. On behalf of the Las Vegas Asian Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and its members, I thank you for your time and consideration. And thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Yeager and esteemed members of the Assembly Committee of the Whole. For the record, Ann Barnett, CEO of the Nevada Contractors Association, here to express our support for SB1. Our association is comprised of skilled contractors and subcontractors who have successfully constructed monumental projects in Nevada, such as the Allegiant Stadium and the recent Las Vegas Convention Center expansion. Passing this legislation will provide for the creation of thousands of high-paying construction employment opportunities on yet another world-class venue, as well as support for our small and diverse businesses and contributing to Nevada's overall economic growth. Taking these substantial benefits into account, the Nevada Contractors Association strongly supports SB1. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chair and Assembly, Nick DeFranco, on behalf of the Operating Engineers Local 12, we are also in support of the bill. It's going to create a lot of good paying jobs as well as benefits. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Alfonso Lopez. I represent the sheet metal and air rail transportation workers, and we too are in full support of this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else in Las Vegas in support? Okay, I don't see anyone coming to the table, so we will come back up here to Carson City. Thank you for your patience as we went to Las Vegas first and we figured out the logistics of how to get you down on the assembly floor. So whoever would like to start first, please go ahead.
Thank you, members of the Assembly. For the record, my name is Vince Saavedra. Vince, V-I-N-C-E, Saavedra, S-A-A-V-E-D-R-A. I'm the Executive Secretary Treasurer to the Southern Nevada Building Trades. I represent roughly 30,000 working families. The blue-collar worker is the community. They've expressed to me, they've elected me to speak on their behalf of those 30,000 workers, and they want to build this stadium. Like my colleague said, we, the Southern Nevada Building Trades, have an agreement with the baseball club that will require 15% of the construction hours to be done by apprentices and 5% to be first-year apprentices. That's going to create a pathway and potentially generational change for people who've never had an opportunity to join a union or a skilled trade. In addition to that, the A's have committed to signing a project labor agreement, which will ensure paying those workers a fair livable wage. There's also been a commitment to have a minimum goal of 51% of the construction work hours be performed by minorities, veterans, females, and disabled workers. This is a great opportunity for Nevada, and I urge you to vote yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Speaker, and members of the Assembly. For the record, my name is Susie Martinez, and I am the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Nevada State AFL-CIO. And on behalf of over 150,000 members and 120 unions, which include many of our service trades, our construction trades, and many of our trades, we are very proud and we are very much in support of this bill. For many years, you know, we have been building our city and making it the amazing entertainment capital that it is. But now with this bill, we can make it the sports capital of the world as well. So we encourage you to pass this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon, chairs and members of the committee. My name is Paul Catha, and I represent the Culinary Workers Union Local 226. The Culinary Union supports SB1 now that the involved parties have come to an agreement that's good for workers in Southern Nevada. While the union avoids picking sides between different unionized employers, the union supports the A's decisions to partner with the unionized Tropicana Las Vegas. The Culinary Union will negotiate to ensure that Tropicana workers' rights under the contract are strictly followed so that workers have additional compensation, healthcare coverage, and pension benefits when the property is closed for redevelopment. Culinary Union contracts include strong language on layoff, recall, seniority, training, and placement so that unionized workers will have access to free job training and continued benefits during closure, seniority rights of first access to job openings if the property reopens, and placement into other job opportunities as they are available. The Culinary Union applauds the A's on agreeing to card check neutrality language to allow the workers at the stadium to freely choose whether to unionize, and the union looks forward to the labor management relationship that will come with Major League Baseball's arrival in Las Vegas. The Culinary Union urges the Nevada Legislature to support and pass SB1. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Greg Esposito, representing Plumbers and Pipefitters Local 525 in Las Vegas, Nevada. After the first time I'd heard the A's presentation in front of this body, I started working with Catherine Aker from the A's on connecting them with some of the community organizations that we've worked with in the past. We had great conversations with the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, Richard Jack from Ty's Place, Whitney Elementary School that does amazing work for the homeless children along the Boulder Highway corridor, and actually, with suggestion from somebody in this body, the Community Health Alliance up here in Washoe County. And the common thread was an interesting, almost giddiness between the two parties. Every time that they would have a conversation, Catherine was talking about, oh yeah, we already work with this organization in Oakland that does this, and we're looking forward to coming to Nevada and doing it again. Every conversation had that tone. And so my organization believes in putting back into the community because that's how you build a community. That's how you keep yourself thriving. And through working with the A's, I'm looking forward to what it is they're going to bring to this community from a social standpoint. So thank you very much for your time, and we fully encourage you to support this bill.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon. For the record, Danny Thompson, representing Labor's Local 872 and IBW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 396. This truly is a jobs bill. And these aren't just ordinary jobs. These are thousands of high-paying, well-benefited jobs, not jobs that will require the state to make Medicaid payments on. These are jobs that people can live on and have a life and have a retirement and be productive members of the community. This unique opportunity allows Nevada to continue to be the destination that it is, and further going to be the sports destination of the world. And so we support this bill wholeheartedly, and we hope that you will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Speaker Yeager, honorable members of the committee, for the record, I'm Jason Gray, Vice President, Government Affairs for MGM Resorts International. As we testified before the Senate Committee of the Whole on June 7th, MGM Resorts strongly supports the Southern Nevada Tourism Innovation Act, including the amended version presented today, to facilitate the construction and operation of a world-class Major League Baseball stadium in Las Vegas. We welcome Major League Baseball and the A's, and believe their relocation to Las Vegas would cement our destination status as the premier sports and entertainment destination in the world. An unthinkable proposition to many not long ago, but certainly not to this body, and not to those of us who know what is possible in Nevada and what Las Vegas is capable of creating when opportunity presents. A Major League Baseball stadium would bring material positive economic impacts to the state and to local governments and to the resort corridor. As we've seen with T-Mobile Arena and Allegiant Stadium, home games drive accretive visitation and spending from spectators and fans. This means more guests staying in hotel rooms, dining in restaurants, and taking in the overall Las Vegas experience, with state and local governments sharing in those incremental revenues. In addition to a robust schedule of Major League Baseball games, a venue of this size and structure would enable our destination to welcome entertainment, sporting, and other special events that may not otherwise come to Southern Nevada. As the largest private sector employer in Nevada and a significant contributor to the state's hospitality industry, Nevada's top economic engine, MGM Resorts strongly supports responsible investments that enhance and spur the growth of tourism to our destination. We appreciate your thoughtful consideration and urge your support. It means a great deal to us, our 41,500 Las Vegas team members and their families, and to the state's tourism and hospitality industry. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else here in Carson City who would like to testify in support? I don't see anyone coming forward. Just let me do one last check. Anyone in Las Vegas in support? And let's go ahead and stay in Las Vegas since I started there. Is there anyone in Las Vegas who'd like to testify in opposition? If so, please come to the table. And once we're done with Las Vegas, we'll come back up here to Carson City. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. Alexander Marks with the Nevada State Education Association, speaking in opposition of SB 1. I'll say it again. We're talking about the A's, but let's talk about the Y's. Why is this still a priority? Why can't a billionaire do this on his own if it's so innovative? Why couldn't the legislature spend 11 days on a measure to reduce our overcrowded class sizes, the largest in the country? And now that the regular session is over, why couldn't we simply fund a 20% raise from the state level for our educators? We all know it's a rainy day in Nevada. We watched as nearly $3 billion were stashed away in rainy day reserves instead of putting more into public education. Sure, a 26% increase is a good start, but only a third of where we should be. Now educators watch this special session as $380 million is being proposed for another publicly funded stadium. We're 48th in education, we're behind Mississippi, we have the largest class sizes in the nation, and our shortage of teachers and education support professionals threatens the basic function of our school system, issues that would legitimately merit a special session. Oddly enough, $380 million was just about the same educators asked the legislature for the 20% raise. It didn't take 11 days to say no, it took until educators were done providing public comment. In its basic form, the amended version of Senate Bill 1 remains a bill with a $380 million giveaway in public funds, which ultimately is the biggest issue. Yet Nevada was the only state in the country to receive 3 Fs in education funding in the Making the Grade report released by the Education Law Center. Educators are watching. What they see are the same issues piling up, and the state has now moved on to a new object. There's been more planning of a world-class stadium than there has been implementing a plan for optimal funding to assure a world-class education, a plan of which was largely ignored this session. When a bill to address summer school or to ensure schools have campus security monitors to help our kids stay safe on campus are vetoed, or when bills to provide a clean 20% raise or reduce our class sizes don't even get acknowledged, that's all our educators and community are seeing. Our decisions reveal our priorities. Some R's and D's want the A's, while our schools keep getting the F's. Nevadans will get the IOUs, and we ask why. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else in Las Vegas who'd like to testify in opposition? Seeing no one coming forward, we'll go here to Carson City. Whoever'd like to start, please go ahead.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders, and I'm the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in opposition to Senate Bill 1. While we appreciate all of the amendments that were discussed today as they are a step in the right direction, they do not change the fundamental problem with this bill. It remains a corporate welfare proposal that will leave Nevada taxpayers on the hook, rather than revenue and funding the programs Nevadans need, especially when we were told there wasn't enough money only a week or so ago. We don't do this for regular people in Nevada. Meanwhile, we're telling corporations to come here and we'll foot the bill. The Nevada way is always business first at the expense of what our communities need most. Why has there been no special session to protect tenants from rapidly rising rents and communities from being displaced? Why has there been no special session to address our transportation needs as a state? We are not opposed to good-paying union jobs or diversifying Nevada's economy, but we shouldn't have to be giving tax incentives and handouts to billionaires to do so. It is irresponsible of the state to prioritize new corporate development over the needs of Nevadans. If the A's want to come to Nevada, they are more than welcome to on their own dime, but it is time for the state of Nevada to prioritize what Nevadans are asking for. We urge your opposition to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. Today, I testify against SB 1 for the final time in my role. I have been very consistent on this issue over the years. I am a proud born and raised Las Vegan whose grandfather was the Secretary Treasurer of the Building Trades and uncle was the Secretary Treasurer of the Culinary Union. I remain against this bill regardless of the amendments or spin we have heard. I would also like to note we have mobilized our 22,000 plus subscribers who live in Nevada against this bill. I have joked as we come to the end of my time with BBP that this has been like the Eras tour of all the worst ideas I've seen in this building. I was standing right in this exact spot in 2016 when the Allegiant Stadium was rammed through in a very similar fashion during a special session with very limited public comment like today. Somehow, though, we managed to bring forward an even worse deal by leaving the taxpayers on the hook because, as you've heard, there is no actual revenue to back these bonds. This just doesn't add up. The A's are a failing team, shouldn't receive our tax dollars when their billionaire owner doesn't need the cash, and yes, we have always fought against billionaires looking for handouts. Just look at the deal the same owner went back on with the Quakes in San Francisco and the stadium that the public built them. They are still last in their league and have not invested in that team as promised, even with the new stadium. A new stadium won't make the team good. I hate to break it to you, but the Raiders are still a losing team, and their record has gotten worse since they moved to Las Vegas. I would also like to know why the A's management is not here today fully answering to why they deserve our tax money, especially after that same management has had such an awful track record with the people of Oakland. I could go on and on about how I've extensively researched studies showing stadiums are bad economics. I've spoken with officials and individuals in Oakland witnessing the mistreatment of the community and fans by this team. Much about this bill troubles me, including the closed books, transportation issues, and the county's financial responsibility. My dad always taught me, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. This bill is like putting lipstick on a pig of a bad deal and a bad team, and this owner should not be trusted. I don't care what you add to this bill, it will not get us to be quiet about how risky this bill is to our state and the people of Clark County. I will end by saying this. I am an avid sports fan. I grew up watching baseball with my dad. On Saturday, I was at the first Stanley Cup game when the Knights won. I'd like to be watching it right now. Not only are they an actual winning team, but they also somehow managed to play in a privately funded facility. Imagine that. I continue to urge you to vote no for this scam. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
All right. For the record, my name is Hana Fahmy, Hanafahmi. I'm here on my own behalf. I come before you today to express my deep reservations about the potential move of the Oakland Athletics and their owner, John Fisher, to our beautiful state. While it may seem enticing to have a Major League Baseball team right in our backyard, we must carefully consider the long-term implications of such a decision. John Fisher's ownership of the Athletics has been marked by a lack of commitment to the team and its fans. A billionaire businessman has consistently shown a preference for cutting cost measures over investing in the team's success. This has resulted in a revolving door of talent and leaving fans disheartened and disillusioned. Las Vegas should not welcome an owner who has demonstrated such disregard for their fan base and sports itself. We deserve an owner who will prioritize the team's competitiveness and strive for excellence off and on the field. Fisher's track record does not inspire confidence, and his ability to provide the stability and commitment necessary for a successful franchise. Las Vegas already boasts a very vibrant entertainment industry and a thriving tourism sector. We should focus our efforts on supporting and nurturing the existing local businesses and organizations that have played a vital role shaping our city. Recently, selling out 10,000-seat stadium for an away game for the Knights is pretty impressive. So rather than importing a team and an owner with questionable commitments, let's invest in our community and encourage the growth of local talent. I'm sadly afraid to envision a future where their sports capital becomes somewhere where only visitors can come, because the Nevadans have not had proper education. Our classroom sizes are too big, the rising cost of living, we won't be able to go. So, thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony.
Hello, for the record, I'm Lacey Aspen. I'm here on behalf of myself, and I just want to say that I live in northern Nevada, and so when hearing about all of the benefits and great things about this bill, it really sounded like I was an outsider in the conversation and that I really wasn't going to see any of these proposed benefits. And the community investment plan really is very vague and looks kind of thrown together without any way to measure or be held accountable. And so I just would like to ditto everything that has been said, and that it's important to be accountable for all citizens of Nevada, not just those in one county, and that transparency and accountability are crucial for ensuring that public funds are being used effectively and efficiently. So I urge you to vote in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening, Speaker Yeager and members of the Assembly. My name is Matthew Wilkie, W-I-L-K-I-E, for the record. I had a speech prepared, but I'm just going to wing it. First thing I'd like to point out is every single person that spoke in support of this bill is being paid to be here, representing a business and a corporation. As someone who's not being paid to be in this building right now, I find it asinine that we are here in a second special session spending taxpayer dollars to talk about giving even a penny to a billionaire, while we have had bills this session that have either died or been vetoed that would have helped youth mental health, would have helped veteran homelessness, and we're here talking about this. I'm going to keep it real quick. I just happen to be, this is my day off, just by chance. I am struggling to pay my bills, to keep a roof over my head, and to keep my lights on, as are many of your constituents. I will tell you, paying my bills is what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about going to a stadium, as are many of your constituents. And to go down that rabbit hole of Assemblywoman Taylor and Assemblyman Gray, the last time the A's averaged 27,000 people per game was in 2004. 2004, from what I gather. And so, with that said, I definitely am against this bill, and I would like to have you think about one thing before you place a vote on this bill. I have heard pretty much every single one of you in some form or another say where we put our money depicts our values. So before you put any vote on this, think about this. Is the value you want to leave this building is giving money to a billionaire while we have people sleeping in our streets? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Assembly. My name is Jeremy Koo, that's spelled K-O-O. I'm not any of your constituents. I'm a resident of Sacramento, originally from the city of Alameda, just a 10-minute drive to the Oakland Coliseum. I can remember being an A's fan for 30 years, since I was 5 years old. And I've been a regular Las Vegas and Reno tourist since I was 21. In fact, on a couple of occasions, I've been one of these visiting sports fans that Mr. Aguero and Mr. Hill are so optimistic about, having seen the Golden Knights play at T-Mobile twice, to which I say for hopefully just 3 more hours, go Knights go. It's evident, therefore, that Las Vegas is a world-class city for professional sports. I've seen it. It deserves world-class owners. So why should Nevada settle for John Fisher's idea of how to run a baseball team? National and local baseball writers, former A's executives, and A's fans have all written and spoken about how Mr. Fisher operates. Read those columns and understand that Mr. Fisher is no Mark Foley, or no Bill Foley, or even a Mark Davis. It is a major news event if Mr. Fisher attends an A's game. He never speaks publicly. He has not once indicated a scintilla of pride that he gets the privilege of owning a Major League Baseball team. Not once has he personally shown that he treasures the honor of helming an MLB team that its community can be proud of. Yesterday, fewer than 5,000 people saw the 18-50 Athletics beat the Tampa Bay Rays at the Oakland Coliseum. Tonight, with the help of word of mouth, social, and earned media, at least 22,000 more Oakland A's fans will be at the Coliseum, most likely the highest attended game of the entire season, to demonstrate that Oakland A's fans are ready to embrace and reward an owner willing to show any sign at all that owning a Major League Baseball team isn't just another asset on his balance sheet to him. To conclude, Mr. Chair and members of the Assembly, for better or for worse, Oakland A's fans are stuck with John Fisher, but Oakland and Las Vegas deserve far better. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there any additional testimony in opposition here in Carson City? I don't see anyone coming forward. I will check one more time in Las Vegas. Anyone else in opposition? I don't see anyone coming forward, so at this time, we'll move to neutral testimony. Is anyone here in Carson City in the neutral position? I don't see anyone coming forward. And how about in Las Vegas? Anybody in the neutral position? I don't see anybody coming forward. I will close neutral testimony. I did want to remind folks who might be watching this meeting online that you do have the ability to submit comments via email, and that email address, again, is ASM as in Mary, COW at asm.state.nv.us, and we will accept comments by email for the next 24 hours, so it is 5:15 p.m., so you have until 5:15 p.m. tomorrow to send any comments to that email address, and that your email will be made part of the official record on this hearing. So with that, I am going to close this informational hearing on this informational presentation on economic development and stadium infrastructure projects. Assemblywoman Howdegee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Committee of the Whole rise and report back to the Assembly. And just for everyone's clarity, because this was just an informational hearing, we do not have possession of the bill. We won't be taking action on the informational measures that we heard today. This was just an informational hearing. The Assembly does not have possession of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy has moved that the Committee of the Whole rise and report back to the Assembly. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The Assembly will come back to order. Assemblywoman Howdiggy, do you want to go to order business 1?
Order of business 1, Mr. Speaker.
Order business 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May the record reflect that Assemblywoman Peters is here. Present.
The record shall so reflect, and I think we have one more that is present with us now who wasn't here this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Staying under order of business 1, may the record reflect that Assemblywoman Gonzalez is present.
The record shall so reflect. Okay, we will go to order of business 7, messages from the Senate.
Senate Chamber, Carson City, June 13, 2023. To the Honorable the Assembly, I have the honor to inform the Honorable Body that the Senate on this day passed as amended. Senate Bill 1, Sherry Rodriguez, Assistant Secretary of the Senate.
Order business 9, introduction, first reading, and reference of bills.
Senate Bill 1, introduced by Committee of the Whole, enacting economic infrastructure projects, enacting the Southern Nevada Tourism Innovation Act, amending the Southern Nevada Tourism Improvements Act, occurring under certain circumstances, the establishment in Clark County of a sports and entertainment improvement district for the financing of a Major League Baseball stadium project, but authorizing the Clark County Stadium Authority to carry out the provisions of law governing the Major League Baseball Stadium project, requiring the creation of a Clark County Homelessness Prevention and Assistance Fund, authorizing the pledge of certain taxes, fees, and charges for the payment of bonds and other purposes relating to the financing of the Major League Baseball Stadium project, requiring the state treasurer under certain circumstances to provide a credit enhancement on bonds issued to finance the construction of the Major League Baseball Stadium project, requiring the issuance of general obligations of Clark County for the financing of a Major League Baseball Stadium project under certain circumstances, authorizing the issuance of transferable tax credits to developer partners for qualified projects relating to the Major League Baseball Stadium project, eliminating certain exemptions from prevailing wage requirements relating to railroad companies or monorails, requiring certain new or expanding businesses to provide certain paid family and medical leave to employees in order to qualify for a partial abatement of certain taxes, making an appropriation and providing in the matters relating thereto.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Senate Bill 1 be referred to your Assembly Committee of the Whole.
Without objection, so referred. That will take us to order business 15, remarks from the floor. Seeing no remarks from the floor, Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seeing no other business before us, I move that the Assembly stand adjourned until Wednesday, June 14th at the hour of 11 a.m. And just for the members who are present, dinner is ready for you in the kitchen.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy has moved that the Assembly stand adjourned until Wednesday, June 14th, 2023 at the hour of 11 a.m. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.
Ways and Means members, do not forget we have IFC tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.